Okay, welcome everybody. We will start this special meeting of the Albany City Council. And City Clerk, can we please have the roll?
Councilmember Hanson Romero.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Lopez is absent. Vice Mayor Mickey.
Here.
Mayor Tiedemann.
Here. And before we get into the meat of our discussion, just two brief things. First of all, much like our previous discussion of the housing element, this one will be a little bit segmented because we have a recusal on some items. We will start with some presentation, then the Vice Mayor will leave. We will do some more presentation, take all public comments, then have some discussion, then our councilman will return and we will have more discussion. I also want to give everybody a heads up. I'll repeat this at the start of the regular meeting, but many cities in the past couple weeks have been dealing with organized hate speech via Zoom public comment. We're trying to deal with this as best we can. We are unfortunately limited in what we can do to limit it, so I ask you all to be prepared and have patience. With that, I think we will toss it over to Leslie.
Great. Good evening, council members and members of the public. I'm Leslie Mendez, planning manager, and I'm here with Sophie Gable-Scheinbaum, our associate planner and also a full-time graduate student. And we have director Jeff Bond here as well. And tonight we are providing a review session introduction regarding the, housing element implementation. Slide, please. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review and accept comments on the proposed Housing Element Program Implementation Plan. The housing element is a state-mandated element of the city's general plan that requires local governments to adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in the community, both present and future. Housing elements address all aspects of housing, including production, conservation, rehabilitation, and fair housing. Housing elements are updated on an 8-year cycle. City Council adopted the 6th cycle housing element for the years 2023 through 2031 on February 21st. After some minor updates, the California Housing and Community Development Department, or HCD, certified our housing element on September 8th, so congratulations. Staff is here this evening to present an initial implementation plan, receive feedback, and begin work. Slide, please. Chapter 6 of the housing element outlines the city's housing goals, policies, and programs in a housing action plan for the maintenance, preservation, and development of housing. The action plan includes 6 overarching goals. 1, equitable access to housing. 2, housing production. 3, implementation programs. 4, special housing needs. 5, reducing housing constraints, fair housing and housing security. And 6, housing resource and administration. Each goal has associated policies and programs for implementation. The city's housing element includes 57 adopted programs that span the 6 goals. And while some of the programs are as simple as initiating meetings with local and regional housing organizations and may only have 1 or 2 action items, there are other single programs that include upward of 12 to 15 separate action items that are all considered under one program. So while the total number of programs in the housing element is 57, the actual number of individual action items are probably closer to 80 or 90. Therefore, to manage the sheer number of programs and action items, staff has created an initial phased implementation plan to support successful and meaningful outcomes. Slide. Staff developed the initial phased implementation plan using the following prioritization criteria. First is the timing outlined in the housing element. We focused primarily on those that had timelines dedicated to 2023 and 2024. Next was the certification letter we received from HCD, identified 10 action items across the 6 housing element goals. They are prioritized, itemized by HCD, and we learned those are ones that they will be following up with us to make sure that we are following up on them. Next, staff also took into account the community interest in certain programs, both expressed during the development of the housing element, as well as more recent engagement, which will be detailed in the next slide by Sophie. Staff focused as well on the related and complementary programs that have both efficiency and greater impact when studied and implemented together, rather than siloed. This includes things such as the anti-harassment and anti-discrimination programs that are often combined in one ordinance, as well as rent stabilization and rent review registries. And finally, with all of these prioritization criteria, staff also strive to find a balance that incorporates larger resource-intensive programs, relationship building, long-term development goals, as well as low-hanging fruit. And with that, I'm turning it over to Sophie.
Thank you, Leslie. So in addition to considering community interest and need in the process of program prioritization, staff also initiated preliminary outreach that will be continued and expanded upon during the course of the 6th cycle housing element and implementation phases. Staff first published a renter survey in both English and Chinese that was open from the beginning of July through final outreach at the Solano Stroll on September 10th. The survey was available online, and hard copies were also available at the city's library, community center, and senior center. In addition to this preliminary survey, staff met with both Albany Property Rights Association and Albany Thrives Together to discuss the high-level implementation approaches and to begin gathering feedback on certain topic areas. In addition to this locally focused outreach, staff also conducted interviews with staff from several Bay Area and California-wide jurisdictions to focus on their existing programs and understand which programs were best combined or worked well concurrently, as well as discuss the resources and capacities for their respective programs. Next slide. And I will just pause here for Councilmember McKee to recuse himself briefly.
So I have a conflict of interest, so I'll recuse myself from this first part of the discussion.
Because you own.
Sorry, because I have a interest in property in which there are tenants.
So additionally, staff just wanted to mention that housing element programs 5H, AFFH, education and historic context, as well as, that's 5F, and 5H is equitable inclusive outreach, are not explicitly included in a certain phase, as we see them as ongoing efforts to be undertaken concurrently with all housing element implementation. So we're now going to review the programs proposed in each phase and briefly outline what each of them are. So phase 1, as you can see here, is primarily focused on portions of program 5D, which is tenant protections. Program 5D is a great example of a single program on paper, but is really inclusive of about 8 to 10 separate programs. Most of the programs have been grouped together here as they are topics most commonly combined under one ordinance or resolution. Additionally, we just wanted to point out that items with a red star indicate programs included in the prioritization outlined by HCD in their housing element certification letter. So first, in program 5D is just cause for eviction, which typically defines specific conditions under which a tenant can be evicted. California state law AB 1482 has established a baseline for this for just cause for eviction, but many Bay Area jurisdictions take that a step further, and this is an opportunity to explore what that would look like in Albany. Non-discrimination and anti-harassment establishes further tenant protections to prevent potential harassment that can be taken against tenants, and these provisions typically go in hand in hand with just cause eviction policies when reviewing our peer jurisdictions. Rent stabilization typically puts a local limit on annual rent increases. AB 1482 has also established a baseline limit for eligible units, but again, this is an example of an opportunity to explore what type of program would be a best fit for the City of Albany more specifically. Staff have also included an evaluation of the rent review program as part of phase 1. Most cities that have a rent stabilization program have some form of rent review or rent registry in order to enforce and monitor the rent stabilization policy. So during the process of evaluating a rent stabilization program, it's most efficient to evaluate the existing rent program and lay out potential improvements consistent with other program findings. And lastly, for phase one, access to legal counsel is a very common component of rent review and tenant protection programs and would be explored as part of the overall program development and understanding. Next slide. So phase two programs are not quite as cleanly connected, but rather encompass a broader spread across the different housing element goals that Leslie outlined earlier. First is relocation assistance, which is often linked to a tenant protection program. However, there are several cities in the Bay Area that have just cause for eviction or rent stabilization, but do not necessarily include relocation assistance provisions. So staff has placed this sub-program into phase two, not phase one, because its program development will be highly dependent on provisions of a potential just cause or rent stabilization program. Accessory dwelling units are a very fast-growing type of housing in Albany, and an incentive program could capture some of this housing at a more affordable level. ADU affordability incentives could include reduced fees or fee waivers and other concessions to encourage homeowners to rent accessory dwelling units to low or moderate income households. Measure K was approved by Albany voters in 1994 and limits the density of the largest privately owned vacant parcel in Albany. This program is focused on potential reform of this measure to rescind the provision and rezone the parcel to accommodate a higher density of potential housing development. And this program requires a voter ballot measure. The San Pablo Avenue specific plan was adopted in July 2022 with several provisions that encourage higher density housing. So as part of monitoring and implementation of this specific program 2D, staff will assess the plan's outcomes thus far and evaluate what modifications, if any, need to be made over time to further encourage housing development. Albany adopted an inclusionary zoning ordinance in 2005 that has not been revisited since its implementation. The program currently requires that projects with 5 or more units provide at least 15% of total units at affordable rents or pay an in lieu fee to support future affordable housing development. Staff will conduct an evaluation of the city's existing inclusionary zoning program to understand the potential costs and benefits of modifying this proportion of affordable units or to adjust the in lieu fee requirement. This program was prioritized as its outcome has potential to significantly impact housing development overall and affordable housing provided in Albany over the next 8-year cycle. And lastly, for phase two, a large portion of the priority programs that were identified by each CD are really focused on building relationships with local and regional providers. And relationship building earlier in the cycle, we find or we think it's going to be really crucial to understand sort of the funding and development landscape for these more specialized types of housing. So this program is intended to really connect staff and the city as a whole with a variety of groups to identify potential housing opportunities and to support housing initiatives. Next slide, please. Phase 3 builds upon work from the previous phases and also focuses on long-term development potential related to the Albany zoning ordinance. So first, building off of the other programs within 5D tenant protections, there's a line item in this program that calls for the study of the feasibility of a local housing voucher program. Housing voucher programs are very complex and resource intensive and are typically administered by county housing authorities. This program does not specifically describe the potential differences between the feasibility of a Section 8 housing program, a housing choice voucher program, a project-based voucher incentive program, so we would need to evaluate all 3 of those different types of housing, local housing vouchers as part of this feasibility study. The City of Albany is currently comprised of nearly 70% single-family zoning for land designated for residential uses. So Program 1A is really focused on revisions to the single-family or R1 zoning district to accommodate a greater mix of housing types and affordable housing opportunities. Similarly, Program 4B, R2 zoning district changes, really builds upon that single-family zoning ordinance reform to reconsider areas currently zoned R2 and to evaluate rezoning to accommodate additional land uses and, again, increased housing densities and affordable housing opportunities. Similar to Program 6E, collaboration with nonprofits outlined in Phase 2, Program 3D, Residential Care Facilities, and Program 3E, Developmental Disabilities, focus on outreach with local and regional service providers to understand what barriers to rehabilitation of housing or development of new specialized housing exist in Albany. And lastly, Program 3H, Emergency Shelter, Low Barrier Navigation Centers, and Single Room Occupancy or SRO housing and employee housing is something we consider low-hanging fruit that requires the city to come into compliance with state law AB 101 to allow low barrier navigation centers in commercial districts by right and to recognize employee housing as a residential use. Staff will also evaluate whether to include SROs by right in this district during this program phase.
So tonight, staff has presented an initial phasing plan to commence work on the programs identified within the housing element as adopted by City Council. We are requesting comment on the phasing plan itself and not on the merits of any specific program at this time. Once we receive the green light for a plan of implementation, we will commence action as outlined and bring forward individual program evaluation as staff completes them. As during these public hearings where considerations of program merit and appropriateness will be deliberated prior to decision by this body. Staff wishes to end by saying that first, you should all commend yourself on the robust housing element that you adopted. But starting tonight, as we move forward with planning for implementation, resource assessment of both staffing and funding will need to be integral to program evaluation. And I'm going to plant this seed early and often, as additional revenue sources and staffing will have to be considered to ensure program success. Next slide. And that concludes our presentation, and we are here to answer any questions. And again, while Councilmember Mickey is recused, we will focus on the tenant protections, primarily Program 5D items, but they are the ones listed here. So we'll focus this item on questions and then comment on tenant protections only. So if you have comments or questions about the other items, that will come after this phase. So thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify how we're going, once we do council questions on these tenant protections, we will go to public comment on all items, I believe.
Correct.
So all items will be addressed in that one public comment period. The Vice Mayor, I believe, is watching and is allowed to watch, so he can still hear the comments. He just can't be part of this bit of the discussion. I also wanted to sort of set and reiterate some of what Leslie said before we get into our questions as well as public comment of we are not really getting into the merits and specific policy decisions on all of these programs. I don't think it is reasonable to expect our staff to have all the answers on those things because they haven't done the work to bring us the analysis and for final deliberation. So we are really here to look at this work plan and I'd also just reiterate that because our housing element has been certified, we can't take anything out of this. We need to do all of these things, otherwise we'll be decertified. This is not a time to rehash whether we should do something that's in this plan. It's getting the work plan and direction to staff of how we're going to do it. So with that, council questions?
If I could ask for a clarification, thank you for the explanation, and nice to meet you, by the way, from a distance. So are you looking for comments on which goes in which phase, or what? Maybe you give me an example of comments that you think are inbounds and not as helpful.
Well, again, it's not, again, about the merits of a program, just so we're all clear. Many of the programs identified state that it should be an evaluation of the feasibility of implementing. So really, it is trying to decide what we work on first as staff,
Okay.
As taking into account the prioritization of how we arrived at that.
Okay, great. So it's phasing, essentially. Yeah, okay. So might as well go ahead. So in the third phase is the housing voucher, local housing voucher program. The executive director of the Alameda County Housing Authority presented, and we took the opportunity to ask him some questions, and he represented that something that city is uniquely positioned to do, and it's the most effective thing cities can do is provide emergency financial assistance for tenants who have a sudden financial gap or need or a crisis in order to keep them in their residence. So that's kind of my main interest now in that, under that domain, so I'd ask you to include that. Albany currently has a program of that nature that we will hear about later in the ARPA-funded program. So I just wanted to ask if that is in the third phase, what is the chance that there'll be a gap in that program? So in other words, potentially that program could continue since it's been developed and it's basically an emergency financial assistance. So if it is in the third phase, would that represent a risk of a gap in funding such that that program would collapse and then have to be restarted?
I am not actually aware of what the funding source is or how long it lasts for the current program, so I don't know if Director Bond has more information on that. But the actual there would be no gap in the actual program, but in terms of funding source, do you have?
I think I'm not familiar with the program, the ARPA program in detail either, but I think that is a good example of something that we should, council can give us direction to make sure that we don't unintentionally create a gap in an important service and program that we could provide.
Yeah, great, okay. Come back to that in deliberation. Can fees on, so currently there's fees on rented residences to pay for the rent review program. Could fees on rented residents help to fund a financial emergency assistance program for tenants?
That's actually something I'm looking into. I don't have
Okay.
the details back.
Okay, so that's just
Yeah.
one potential source of funding of interest to me. Given that the state has rent control and just cause eviction, I think my understanding from one of the discussions, I can't remember which one, was that even if Albany were to adopt versions of those that were no stricter, there is a advantage to doing so in terms of enforceability. I guess could you confirm that that's the case, and if so, provide any color or details to that?
I don't know if there's an advantage other than code enforcement, absent us litigating it, which would involve a massive budget. Not sure, unless we were going to go above and beyond the existing law that I think was mentioned earlier. That can have some benefit, but adopting the exact same language only allows for code enforcement violations, and then, we could, in theory, litigate, but that would involve a significant budget.
Okay. I mean, I don't know much about code enforcement, but it's something that's in the council's strategic plan, so if it has an advantage to being able to do code enforcement, then that seems like an advantage, more to be learned. Did HCD specify which program goes in which phase, or is that somewhat up to local control?
They did not.
Okay, all right. Those are my questions, thanks.
Thank you for the presentation. It makes sense to me, some of the things that you were laying out in phase one versus, because really it has to come from studying and figuring out what portion of what is going to go where before you jump to the next step. So that absolutely makes sense. And I just want to really actually just want to hear more from actually the people who are here tonight and see what comments that they have about all of this, because as we've mentioned, it's a study session, and I'm very interested to hear how others think about all of these steps. And also with the surveys, I know you brought the surveys up, so we've got some information back from some of the surveys. Do you feel like that's been adequate as far as who's been surveyed? Do you feel like that there's been enough comment, feedback, or do you feel like we still need to reach out more?
We got a robust response, I think over 400 responders. I don't think that's enough, because that's still a very small segment of the population. So our goal is to continue outreach efforts in different means and different manners to try to reach as many people and to try to bring people in to get their, because we all we all have homes, we all need homes, so it's relevant to everyone. So we're going to do more.
Great, great. Yeah, because that is definitely one of the things that I hear a lot about is that, oh, well, I didn't know anything about it, or I haven't been asked, or, so yeah, I think the outreach is really important. The other thing that I think is equally, if not more important, is just the outreach of information of what everything means to each prospective person in, you know, me being a renter, I've been a homeowner, I'm a real estate agent, but, you know, I want to make sure that there's no unintended consequences, and that with more information, more knowledge to all parties involved, I think that that will help us bridge some sort of gaps that may be, you know, unsure of what something may mean or how it might affect something else. So that's one of the things that I really would encourage us to work on as well. So thank you.
Any more questions? None? I don't think I have any. So we will go to public comment. We have a fair amount of people online, and I'm assuming everyone here tonight so far is commenting on this item. So for the sake of the rest of our full night, I'm going to say that we are going to have 2 minutes for each public comment. And City Clerk, can we please start calling people? Starting with people in the room.
So if there's anyone that would like to speak on public comment, please go ahead and line up. Sure.
Yes. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Lois Brown, and I live on Gateview in Albany. I'm looking at the materials in the presentation, and I don't see any reference or consideration for the small landlord. Who protects the landlord against tenants who abuse the protections that you're providing? It's like we don't exist. Has any consideration been given to the small landlord who doesn't have, you know, expensive lawyers to help us out? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Others in the room, if you want to line up at the public comment dais. And/or submit a speaker card to our city clerk if you'd like to be called.
My name's Chris Moore. I'm with the East Bay Rental Housing Association. We represent 1,400 1,500 small and medium-sized housing providers across Alameda and Contra Costa County. I just had a thank you for your presentation. I just had a couple comments on this. In particular, phase one, it was, you know, we do have AB 1482. In fact, the governor just over the weekend on Friday expanded it, and so the state is constantly improving that from a protection standpoint. And I think what you see is they largely have left out single-family homes in AB 1482. And that is because, you know, there's many individuals in the community that they have a home, they may rent it out, and then they may need to sell it to send their grandkids to school, or they may need to need it for other reasons. And a lot of these, even in 1482, it makes it very difficult for them to do that. If they need to send their grandkids to school or sell the home for another reason, they could be locked up for years. And so therefore, they just don't rent it. So it reduces supply on the market. And that's what a number of these things do. And when we say many communities, actually Alameda County just decided not to do this. Really the only cities that do this expand over the state is Berkeley and Oakland. And we know they have significant issues there, significant problems. Just a couple other things here. Collaboration with not-for-profits in phase two. How about we add private owners to that? They're the ones that provide the housing in the community. There's access to legal counsel should be for both renters and housing providers, right? It shouldn't just be for one-sided. And that's it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your comment.
I'm Elaine Stelton, and I wanted to mention that in the same paper that actually Mayor Aaron Tiedemann was quoted in recently, speaking on behalf of EBHO as a policy manager, they have an article that rents have been down for the past 27 months, all throughout the Bay Area, Contra Costa, Alameda, etc. The other point I wanted to bring up is there have been no evictions in the past 3 to 3.5 years, depending on Berkeley is at 3.5 years. So some of these things don't seem relevant at this moment, given that we haven't had evictions, rents are down, rent control is emergency legislation. We do not have an issue right now. That same paper where Aaron Tiedemann was quoted said basically tenants are renegotiating their leases down, not up, if they want to stay. Otherwise, they're threatening to leave. I guess I would ask you to please be fair, and by that I mean if you are offering legal assistance to tenants, then please offer it to property owners. We have been asking for a very, very long time to utilize the funds from the rent review program to help tenants that get into a difficult situation and can't pay the rent. We've probably been asking that of you since the program's inception, really. So please, please, please utilize those funds to help tenants. We would greatly appreciate that.
Thank you for your comment.
I'm Peter Campbell from the Albany Property Rights Advocates, and I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I guess my main comment is I'm concerned that I don't think there is much data to support any of these things at this point. You had a tenants survey. You said you got 400 responses. Only 77% of those were from tenants, so that means about 300 from tenants. And it was not a scientific survey. Anybody could sign in whether they were tenants or not. You have no way of verifying, as far as I could tell, any of that information. It was just thrown out there. So I'm concerned that there's no data to really support what you need to do or what you want to do. And I encourage you to get good data, to do scientific data, scientific studies to find out what kinds of problems there might actually be in Albany. I don't know if there's a lot of discrimination going on in housing in Albany or not. I just don't know, and I don't know if you know. I don't know if you have the data for that. Harassment, I don't know that tenants are being harassed. If anything, probably the property owners are being harassed. Rent review program has been in effect for years. I think there have been something like 80 inquiries on that, very few of which were other than just, what is it? And I second the comment about access to legal counsel. If counsel is made available to tenants, in fairness, it should be made available to the property owners as well. Let's be fair. Let's be balanced in whatever you do. I think that's all I want to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Mike Jojaji. I've been a resident of Albany for 18 years. I'm an immigrant to this country. I came here when I was young with my family and have very similar stories as other immigrants who come to America. I'm happy to say that I'm a US citizen. I've been a renter for a very long time. I was a student all in my 20s, and worked in my 30s and rented my 20s, 30s until early 40s and managed to buy a house with the help with a family member, put our money together, buy a fixer-upper in Albany. So 18 years we've tried to, me and my wife think about retirement. One way is to get some perhaps rental income. So we put a ADU together. It's almost being done. But we are deeply concerned about the regulations that are being set forward. We are not very familiar. We are not savvy at all, single family owners. And currently we have decided we're not going to rent it out because we are just too scared. There are so many state laws that are out there we're not familiar. We talk to people who are owners, and one of our neighbors has had two renters who haven't paid rent for 3 years. If that happens to us, my wife, we're literally going to lose the house. We won't be able to make the payment. Bank will take over and will sell it to well-heeled investors. And I think some of these laws, I'm, by the way, a proponent of fair housing. All the programs that we have here are sound. I just don't know if we have really delved down and captured all the details or have a very balanced view of the pros and cons of everything we are trying to do. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm hoping that you consider input from single-family housing owners.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening. My name is Margie Marks. I'm speaking on behalf of Albany Thrives Together. We agree that the landlord should get legal protection if the tenants get it, and we want them to get it. We 100% support modification of Measure K. We'll work jointly with the city to get it passed. We also support single-family zoning reform. Under tenant protections, AB 1482 is not worth the paper it's written on. The deficiencies include it expires before the housing element does. 2, there is absolutely no enforcement mechanism in the law. The only way for a tenant to enforce anything is to go to state court, which is an impossibility for most tenants. 3, the allowed up to 10% yearly rent increase is not sustainable and bad policy. Under rent review, you included feedback from the landlords that the program was working as intended. I have to ask you, why do you never mention that tenant advocates had said the program is a miserable failure? The statistics from the program back up that claim. Only 17 cases over 5 years went to rent review, and none, 0, had what the city called a successful completion. To put that information out would have been a much truer description of the program than you have published here. What our fear is that if you can't be honest about the description of the program, how can you take on the problems of the program? I have been told by one city employee and at least one elected to trust you. We will get tenant protections in Albany. Please give me some reason to believe it'll happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any further comments in the room? I'll remind everyone that despite our taking this in pieces, this is the only public comment period for this study session. So if anyone has any that they'd like to do, go for it now.
Hello, my name is Alan Charles. We own a home in Albany, 30 years. If I'm not mistaken, people who have been doing Airbnb are receiving a tax on their income of the Airbnb. I think there's an annual or quarterly statement, rather, to put on the record how much you're earning and how much you have to pay in taxes. My question is, for the non-Airbnb owner of a home or apartment, is there a plan involved in taxing the homeowner for the rental of the unit? I'm not sure you even have proposed that, but that's what I'd like to know. Is there a proposal to tax owners of rental property? And if so, when will that take place?
Thank you for your comment. Any further comments in the room? Seeing none, we will go online.
Just one.
Yes, hi, my name is can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Tuan, and I'm an immigrant in the community. My family came to this country, and we rented for a long, long time. We finally saved up to buy a home, and are also thinking of renting out a single-family home. But we've been following the legislation, and it's just been really, really scary for us because we've seen what's happening in Oakland and in Berkeley, and the housing policy there have a lot of legal paperwork, red tape, and a lot of people getting harmed there. It looks like from very onerous housing policy. The regulations were supposed to help provide more affordable housing, but the rent there in Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco is the highest with all these regulations. And it seems like the economists are right, and these tend to hurt more than they harm. And the survey that you guys have put out seems to be just for renters, and it doesn't address the folks who are providing housing. Where's the survey for those folks? Also, 1482, my understanding, the state law also provide a lot of those protections, and they left out single-family homes because there's a real concern of losing a lot of rental property supply when you have these rigorous, harmful policies in place. I would suggest that you stick with the state-level legislations because those policies are much more vetted through various committees, and it's been widely discussed at multiple inputs. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any more speakers who would like to speak online? If you are on the phone, you can press *9 or press raise your hand on Zoom. Let's see, we have one.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I wanted to just have a few comments. One is that I know that APRA has a way of disseminating information out to people who landlords, and so they show up at meetings, and there really isn't a really solid tenants union in Albany. So even though you're not hearing from a lot of tenants, I hope you understand that that's because they don't know about this. Nobody has sent them an email saying you need to show up at the meeting tonight, which is what happened with APRA. So I just want to, you probably already know that, I just want to emphasize that just because there are a lot of people, a lot of landlords or housing providers speaking tonight doesn't mean that there are an equal amount or more of the tenants who would also be speaking. I wanted to address the outreach for the rental surveys and in general the idea of doing outreach. I was walking in Albany the other day, and I was thinking I could go door to door with a survey for renters. I know a lot of the renters in the area, and I was wondering if you thought about actually trying to pull in some volunteers who would do door to door, just like you would if you were campaigning, because it's really 400 obviously is far short of the number of renters, and you really need that personal interaction to give people an opportunity to know what's going on in Albany, and that you want to hear from them if you sincerely want to hear from them. I also wanted to just mention that the word affordable, I know that it's something that HCD uses, and I wish you would talk about what that means in Albany, because affordable, of course, doesn't really mean a lot if you have very little money. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any more folks online?
But that's it.
Right. Seeing no more comment. We had some questions there that I I think I have an answer for several, and then we can refer some more to staff before we get into council discussion on the tenant protections part of this. Firstly, there was a question of where's the small landlord in this plan, as well as a related question about where's the data. Those both have, I think, the same answer of if you look at the housing element, it has that we are going to work with landlords, with tenants. We are going to gather data. The first step for all of the programs here, I think, has some version of saying we are going to analyze, explore, do something to that effect. I'm seeing staff nod. So the first part of every part of this is gathering data, is working with everybody who's involved, working with the stakeholders and talking to them and getting that. So that is a big part of it. And the fact that these are a lot of tenant-related things does not mean that our staff is only going to speak to tenants. As they have already done, they are speaking to representatives of the landlord community as well. Let's see. We also had a question about why haven't we said that that we have feedback that the rent review program doesn't work. I think that feedback was included in the housing element, but I will also just offer some context that we've heard from the landlord community that they've said people don't use it. We've heard from the Albany Thrives Together and others that people don't use it. Our housing element, that's why our housing element says that we are going to look at it and figure out how to replace it or make it into something that works. I don't think anyone here is arguing that what we have is working great, and that's why we're saying we're going to do something else with it. We had a question of if there is a plan to tax non-Airbnb owners who rent. I'm going to refer that one to staff, as I don't think that we have that, but I want to...
Mr. Mayor, you're correct that we don't have that, and any new tax goes to the voters ultimately. So the voters would have the final word on that, and there would be certainly...
And do we have a city-level tax on Airbnb?
There's a business license that they pay, business license tax, but no other special tax, just on the Airbnb.
Great, thank you. We had another question about why there's a survey for tenants and not for landlords. I'll throw that over to staff, but I think the answer is that we have several of you who represent groups of property owners here tonight, and we do not have any representatives of tenant unions. Albany Thrives Together is not a tenant union. We do not have a tenant union in Albany. We have organized representation of the people who rent homes here. We don't have that for the other side, so why we have a survey. But as I said earlier, we are going to continue outreach for that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Throughout the housing element process, we did hope for a little bit more tenant engagement, and we didn't get it. We tried. And in the housing element, we acknowledged that and said that we wanted to start by doing a tenant survey. We recognize it's not scientific. It's, as any community survey goes, it's not, we're not the Census Bureau or something like that that's trying to do a demographic analysis. It's just a way of asking, one form of asking people some structured questions that hopefully can inform staff and the council about the environment, the rental environment. It's also a way to begin the conversation, engage people. A good way to start any conversation is, what do you think? And that's just one way of doing that. It's certainly not the final word, but hopefully it yields some insights that maybe we didn't get up to this point.
Thank you. And there's one more question on that, but before we go to that, I wanted to just acknowledge 400 responses. Have we gotten that level of response on really any other city survey we've put out?
I can't think of one, and I would add that we didn't have any prize like gift cards or anything. Councilmember Jordan, I think, had a...
I think the Parkland survey didn't have 1,200 responses. It was over 1,000, if I recall. It was pretty incredible.
Your memory is better than mine. So we're happy with 400, given there's probably, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 rental units. We have at least 10% of those units theoretically represented, or 300 of the 400 respondents are tenants. So,
thank you, Councilmember Jordan can always be relied upon to have a good institutional memory, but that does not detract from 400 being a very impressive number, which I wanted to acknowledge. And then last, we have a question of, have we considered door-to-door surveying? I also just wanted to sort of give a chance to explain what are we doing to promote this survey and get it out there, if we can just briefly talk about that.
Sophie, do you want to talk about what we did? And I can.
So as we said, it was available online, and then we also had hard copies at the city's library, community center, and senior center. The survey was available online, but we also provided a postcard to rental addresses in Albany with a QR code to the survey. And the survey link was also provided in the city's e-news announcements 3 times over the course of the survey period. As we mentioned, we also had surveys and the QR code for the survey available at both the July 4th Festival at Memorial Park as well as the Solano Stroll, which both garnered about 50 additional responses each. In terms of additional engagement strategies, I think I'll defer to Director Bond about the door-to-door. But I think, there's lots of other opportunities to engage folks, whether it's through focus groups, through town halls, through, different mixed media sort of ideas and presentations. But I think we really want to focus on first what the program will look like potentially and get sort of a better, like you said, idea of sort of the demographic and data related sort of context of the city of Albany before deciding what kind of outreach strategies would be a best fit.
With respect to door-to-door outreach, I don't know if any city in California that does door-to-door outreach in a systematic way throughout the city. We do mailers, but just knocking on doors is simply not practical for us. We have a very small department, we have a lot to do, and that is, it would be very valuable for sure, but not practical.
Thank you for that clarification. With that, I think that is all the questions that we got. With that, we will bring it back to council deliberation. And this is our deliberation on the tenant protection measures. When our vice mayor returns, we will discuss everything else. So does anyone want to start us off, or should I?
I just have one thing, maybe perhaps just talking in that outreach section, it would make sense to me that maybe a good way to survey the tenants might be through the landlord or property provider group, so that they could actually push it out to their tenants and maybe garner some additional responses through that. So maybe we could use the Albany property rights advocates to extend this survey to their tenants, and that might perhaps garner us some more information, some more data, and maybe perhaps also, get information from them directly as well. So just thought process there.
Yeah, with the mayor's accedence, knowing that there are many providers of housing here, I don't know if it's common knowledge that the city actually does currently have an ARPA-funded program for assisting tenants who get into financial trouble. So I don't know if the city manager or other staff could announce how people can get in contact with that or connect their tenants to that should they get in trouble.
Sure, it'd be through contacting our Albany Cares division. I can get that information. I would also encourage you to stick around, if you will, under our presentation item under the regular council agenda, item 8.1. We have an update on the Rescue Act plan funding and the programs that are funded by that source, including the tenant support and rental stabilization.
And as long as the money lasts, which it could last to 2026, that program will exist. So if you do have a tenant who gets in a financial jam, please make that connection so you can benefit from the continuity and they can benefit from being able to stay in their residence. You mentioned rent registry, I think. I don't recall seeing that in the staff report. I might have missed it. There was a lot in there. So I don't know if you could say a few more words about which of these programs that would be, consideration of that would be a part of?
Yeah, so that's actually under phase one, rent review. It's program, I think 5C, if I'm not mistaken. And that rent review, rent registry are sometimes different, sometimes used concurrently. In the Albany housing element, it's considered under rent review.
Okay, thank you. And Albany doesn't have a rent registry currently, unless I'm mistaken. Is that?
It does have a rent review program, not a rent registry.
Right, okay, thank you. So yeah, I'll just reiterate my interest in not having the emergency financial assistance program have a gap between ARPA and the city, should it choose to set one up. And I'm a little nervous not providing any thoughts or direction on the merits, because city staff's going to spend a lot of time on this, and I hate to have city staff not have any idea, the likelihood of researching a policy, whether it has any likelihood of being adopted or not. So I'll just say I'm not really in favor of in lieu fees. From what little I've followed, they don't seem to keep up with the actual cost of building a residence. So even if they match the cost of building a residence at the time the fee is paid, by the time the fee is used, it's far behind due to construction cost escalation. And then on...
Can I clarify
sure.
which item you're including? Are you including it in the revisions under the inclusionary zoning ordinance?
Yeah, yes.
Which I think we can talk about when the vice mayor is here, correct?
Oh, okay. Okay. I can hold off. Well then, so I'll make a comment on rent stabilization / rent control. I thought to analyze the U.S. Census Bureau's data this weekend to get a perspective on what's been going on. Turns out they have that in their American Community Survey, and I was pretty shocked to find that rents have not accelerated or not gone up more than CPI. That doesn't really match the conventional wisdom that I have as somebody who isn't in that market. It did go up faster than CPI in 2021, according to that data, but then looking at apartment listings since then, because 2021 is the last year that the Bureau has put out data for, rent has been less than CPI. Rent increases have been less than CPI. So if there should be a rent stabilization control ordinance, it seems like it would have to cut right down to CPI to have much of an effect. So I'll just put that out there. I'll be interested to see, if staff verifies that data or comes back with different data.
I also just want to add in that I do agree, as far as was brought up a couple of times, is adding in the legal for both sides, not just one. So.
Yes, I think I agree with most of our comments, with the one exception of I think Councilmember Jordan's point about the ACS data and what the CPI could be is exactly the reason to have this and to have the additional analysis happen of, the first step in all of these programs is looking, what's the situation on the ground, what's the best evidence we have, what's the Albany specific stuff, and do we need it, and if we do, what does it look like? And we don't have all of that data yet because staff hasn't done it, which is not to their fault. They have been working on this work plan, which I think is great, and I really appreciate the work on. I will just also say that, public comment tonight was on all items. We did this with the housing element. No one here really talked about zoning very much. Every time we've talked about these things, the tenant protections take center stage, which I think means regardless of how anyone on council feels whether any of them should pass, they are obviously the highest priority to get firm data on, to actually look at in the best way we possibly can, and then make a considered and informed decision about. So I think that makes a lot of sense where they've been put in this so far, and I encourage everybody who's joined us tonight and given us their opinions that, just like with the housing element, we are still, this is a long process, and I apologize that it is so long, but such is democratic local government. we will have much more discussion on these things and much more deliberation when we have stuff in front of us to really make, yes or no, up or down decisions on. And I am personally looking forward to that. So I really appreciate all the work that's been done to get us to this point. Any other council deliberation on this bit? Seeing none, I think that means we can invite our vice mayor back.
One other item before the vice mayor comes back. I think it sounds like you're okay with the priorities listed for phase 1. And then R2 zoning, we were hoping to chat as well before Vice Mayor Mickey came back, given that the property is in the R2 zoning.
Good to know. Are we all okay with R2 zoning where it is now?
Yes, although I think the proposal was to look at, properties that only have a single residence, downzoning them, which, I don't know, I'm not really in favor of that, but we'll see what comes forward.
I think we're all in agreement on that. I think that means we can bring the vice mayor back now. And with that, I think that brings us to questions on anything else that we haven't discussed yet. Are there any council questions on any of the other stuff before we get into council deliberation on the other stuff? Vice Mayor? Plenty of time to think about it out there.
I do not have questions. I do have comments, but that'll be for discussion.
Any comments over here?
Questions?
That brings us to discussions. Mayor, do you want to start us off?
Thank you for having me back in the room. I think the big thing that maybe this was a question for staff, but I think one of the things, just noting our housing element and noting the deadlines, is pretty much everything is due December 31st, 2025. That really means for us to deliberate on, make decisions on, we're talking mid-2025, if we're going to have robust discussion on all this. I understand we have priorities and we have phases 1, 2, and 3 here. I'm a little not understanding how all these phases aren't actually happening at the same time. And so maybe this is a question for Jeff, because there's 18 months, 20 months before mid-2025? And so this is a lot of topics, and I don't know, maybe you talked about this, but we say phase 1, we say phase 2, we say phase 3, but what does that really mean? Is phase 3 starting now, but it's really more like gaining base information and we're not talking about it yet? Is it that phase 1 is all happening as fast as we can have it happen, right? So I'm trying to understand what bigger categories mean and the timing across that, because it's not a lot of time. And that is not necessarily our decision. That was something that came from the state, that they wanted these things done quickly. So I'd love to understand a little bit about the timing or thoughts, initial thoughts, nothing final.
I can provide the initial answer that my colleagues can elaborate on. So as you know, there's 57 adopted programs with numerous action items. And very honestly, it is going to be nigh impossible to accomplish all of that within 8 years. Hence the work plan kind of implementation program. So we can focus on those items that we feel are priorities, both as a community as well as those that HCD says, these are your priorities, to make sure we get those done. Because I think what is important for a small city, we have limited resources, is that what we do is deliberate and that what we do is implementable. Because we can easily go through the list and say done, 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 but if we don't have the resources to make it successful, there's no point in implementing it. So I guess we're taking a realistic look at what we can do and do our best and start, 2 months ago. But since our certification was delayed by a few months, I would take even the timelines that we adopted in the housing element and it took them 5 months, add 5 months at least to that, I think they should give us that's HCD for, and I don't know,
Oh, I completely agree with Leslie, and would just add that we do need to be efficient about this at staff level. Frankly, council too will, and our advisory bodies will need to be to move along. These are difficult questions, and they're not easy decisions to make, but we do need to kind of grind through them sooner rather than later. We don't want to be able. We don't know exactly how stringently the state will be holding us accountable, but we do know that accountability is an increasing element of HCD activities. They're hiring accountability staff. So we presume in the past housing elements, there hasn't been a ton of accountability. It's really been on us just to recognize we made this commitment. We want to fulfill our commitment to the council and the community, but now I think the state's going to be looking over our shoulders. For better or worse, every city, big and small, is in the same place. Everyone is feeling a little overwhelmed. Leslie and I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was a session where they were just talking about this, and I don't know, 100 people in the room all were feeling exactly the same way. And as you're feeling right now, like, how are we going to get through this? It's going to be tough, but we're going to do it just one meeting at a time and grind through it. That's the best we can offer you.
Councilor Jordan, before you mentioned about the in lieu fees on the inclusionary zoning, I think it'll be an interesting discussion when we get to it. I think there is an argument for those fees in that they can scale if they, the city invests a little and then it unlocks more money somewhere else. And in the interim, I can introduce you to someone who can make the case better than I can, and I think outdo you on attention to detail. So keep that in mind.
Challenge accepted.
Any other council deliberation on this bit of the item?
I mean, overall, I just think that, basically understanding, as with anything, what's the problem that we're trying to solve and how best to do it as efficiently and effectively without causing other harm in other ways is really the best outcome I could hope for. So just keeping that as, the large perspective overall is important to me, so.
So I asked the question about phasing, and it sounds like we actually have more time than is listed in our housing element to accomplish these things. And I worry a little bit on all of the items we have listed, but in particular in phase 3, since just that some of those are things that actually, if I were a consultant and I were asked to help you all with this, I would say 18 months is a very ambitious schedule. And so that's what makes me nervous about understanding that we have phase 1 through phase 3, and some things in phase 3 on their own are 12 months is a fast pace. It can be done, depends on how extensive the changes are you're really considering. And so I just raise that as a point because I think there are many items here in all the phases that can consume all the oxygen in the room and can stop other staff from being able to focus on multiple things. And so I am glad that staff recognizes this. I'm glad that staff wants to hold to a very, what they have described as an ambitious schedule. But I think that I am nervous as to what a more realistic timeline actually looks like. Even if we had another 6 months, do we think we could actually get through phase 3? And so it doesn't necessarily mean I'm advocating we rearrange anything, but I'm just, this is a lot. And it's not even, as staff said, everything that is in our housing element. So let alone active transportation plan, potentially Solano Avenue, other things that this city wants to do. So I just raised that.
Which I would say is a good thing to be aware of. I think as Director Bond stated, you know, we're trying to get through as much as we can, as quick as we can. And I think this effort to give us something of a roadmap as well as prioritization is the right way to go about that, even if it doesn't go on a strict timeline of this will get done in this month, this will get done this month, this will get done this month. But I think it is a good thing to keep in mind. But unfortunately, somewhat of an unavoidable thing. And as Director Bond said, something that everybody is dealing with to some extent. Maybe Oakland or San Francisco is not feeling that pinch as much because they have a lot more staff, but I think even everybody else, is dealing with some of that. And I really appreciate all the work that has gone into trying to get us further on that effort.
Of the items that you're allowed to consider, given your expertise as a planner, there's probably some variation in the amount of time and effort that each one would consider. So when you look at those items and you look at sort of cost benefit, do you have any ideas on whether the ordering of those items sort of provides the best cost benefit, or would you suggest reordering them in some way?
I'm not necessarily thinking of reordering any of the phasing that staff has brought, because I think from the perspective of when we as the commissions and the council will see items, I think the order makes a lot of sense. But to me, it's the groundwork on some of those phase 3 things, well, phase 2 and phase 3 things that, like, I'm hoping that they're more concurrent than they are literally we're going to wait to start some of the other items until phase 1 is done. That's what I would say more so than anything. And it's not even necessarily that they're taking a lot of staff time, but that probably needs a little bit of analysis to be done ahead of time.
Thanks.
Any further council comments, suggestions? If not.
Well, I guess I would just ask, has staff gotten something of what you were hoping for?
That's what I was about.
Oh, sorry.
Have we provided the direction that is needed?
This is great. Thank you all. And thank you all for attending as well.
Great. Thank you for all the hard work on this. I know it's been a lot and will continue to be so, as we were just discussing. So thank you in advance, and we will look forward to all of this coming back to us. Ask council, do we need a recess or anything? Or you want to go straight into the meeting? Let's do it. That will adjourn the special meeting of the Albany City Council and bring us straight into our regular meeting. I will read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of LaShawn. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. City Clerk, can we please have the roll?
Councilmember Hanson Romero.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Lopez is absent. Vice Mayor Mickey.
Here.
Mayor Tiedemann.
Here. Before we get to some of our other items, a couple things to announce or bring attention to at the top of the meeting. First of all, for anyone who celebrated Yom Kippur a week ago, Shana Tova. Then less pleasant matters. As I said in the previous meeting, a brief warning, we seem to be overlooked for now, hopefully the benefits of being a small city. But there has been a recent organized campaign of hate speech via Zoom public comment at city council meetings across the Bay Area. They've hit a lot of different cities around here, including both of our neighbors. Unfortunately, the First Amendment and the Brown Act severely limit our ability to fight these efforts, so if they do come, we will have to bear with them to some extent. Many other councils are exploring no longer making Zoom comments available, which we have not done, but may have to consider if this keeps going, or if we get hit. But please rest assured that the city manager, the city attorney, and I have discussed this at some length and have some patience with us, and know that we are here to conduct the public's business with all the respect we can, and no amount of this sort of hatred will change who we are as a city or stop us from conducting that business. I also wanted to briefly mention, as everyone has likely heard, we had on September 21st, we experienced a shooting at the service center by the highway, an act of senseless violence that left Richmond resident Alana Gallen dead along with her attacker. So I wanted to start our meeting by offering the city's condolences to the friends and family of the victim, especially the son that she left behind. We are doing everything we can as a city to offer services and counseling to those affected, and I wanted to reiterate my personal thanks to the Albany Police Department, the Albany Fire Department, the Berkeley Fire Department, the Berkeley Police Department, and the Alameda County Sheriff for their responses on the scene, as well as the efforts by all of our staff to help manage the situation. We will be ending our meeting this evening with a moment of silence in commemoration. That's all the things I had to get to. That will bring us to the city manager's report, as we have no ceremonial matters tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. In follow-up to the mayor's comments regarding the homicide, the investigation remains ongoing, and we will continue to post information on our website. City clerk will display that link, where the 2 shared releases have been posted to date with the lead agency with regard to the releases, at least being Alameda County. Recognition to our mayor for preparing a mayor's statement on this horrendous incident as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the recent street lighting workshop that occurred. We had a fairly good turnout for a smoke air-filled evening, Tuesday, September 19th. The workshop is viewable on the city's YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to make it, you can still get some information on street lighting basics and the work within this project. Participants were able to take a tour of different sites and gauge their response to those streetlights. Much more work to come on this, so if you missed this opportunity, we will have other conversations going forward. Reminder that October 5th, this Thursday, at 6 p.m., we will have a special meeting of the City Council at the Community Center with regard to the Albany Twin Theater property. Join us for a conversation and information regarding that location. We have a Friends of Albany Parks cleanup this Saturday, October 7th. Join us at Ocean View Park down the street, 900 Buchanan Avenue. Volunteers are needed from 9 to noon. Albany Parks, Friends of Albany Parks has committed over 150 service hours to cleaning, planning, and beautifying the green spaces in our city. And we certainly couldn't do it without our volunteers. And there'll be hot coffee and treats, so please join us. The Albany Hill survey that we've spoke about at recent council meetings will be closing at the end of the month. If you haven't had an opportunity to share your feedback regarding Albany Hill and the various projects involved in the Hill, including management of our eucalyptus trees, please join us in contributing your comments. The survey is developed as part of the Habitat Restoration Internship Program funded by the State Coastal Conservancy. The link is on our website as well. A reminder that sidewalk repair phase 7 is now ongoing. I mentioned this at our last meeting as well. I'd like to reiterate all of the work that goes into this program by our Public Works Department in particular, and you can find a very easy scannable map and updates on our website, along with construction updates to all major projects. Also, October is Crime Prevention Month. Our police department has sent out some helpful information The nuts and bolts of it are get to know your neighbors and make sure that you have communication and awareness around your neighborhood. There's a lot more tips and tools on our website, albanyca.org/crime prevention. And finally, hopefully you all received the Alameda County AC alert, but just want to note it because those emergency drills out of nowhere can be concerning from time to time. October 4th at 11:20, apparently there will be an emergency drill sent to all TVs, radios, and cell phones. It is a test, and no action is needed. That completes my report. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any follow-up clarifying questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to the public. This will be for questions on the city manager's report only, and you'll have 1 minute. If you are here to talk about for good of the city, that is coming up next. This is for questions on the city manager's report. Is there anyone in the audience?
No one in the virtual. Seeing
none, that will take us to good of the city. This is for persons desiring to address the council on items that are not on the agenda. Due to the Brown Act, the council is limited in its ability to discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, we will try to briefly answer questions or refer them to staff or for future agenda items. And in this and all other comment periods, please address the council and be respectful, as we want everyone to be comfortable while making comment. We'll start with those in the room, and we'll have folks have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, Margie Marks again. I know I'm up here to complain a lot, but I just wanted to say I was so happy when I walked into the City Hall this evening and saw the display for National Hispanic Heritage Month. I had complained at one point about the city passing these proclamations and then you don't put anything up about them. And I noticed now in the community center, there's displays when you pass these things, and today at City Hall. So I want to thank whoever's responsible for that. I think it's really important, and it's really helpful for the education in our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Good evening, council and staff. My name is Jack Kenny, and
Naomi Siegel.
And we are the co-founders of the Albany Film Fest. Wanted to bring it to your attention. It's coming up next week, and hopefully you've been seeing the posters and the banners around town. We've got a good show coming up. We really wanted to thank the City of Albany for all its support it's given the film festival for the last 13 years, including this year. And we're looking forward to having a successful festival this year. Started off kind of rocky, as you might expect, because our home of 8 years, the Albany Twin, closed down. Luckily, we're able to find another commercial film place in nearby El Cerrito at the Cerrito Theater, just a few blocks down San Pablo. They've been very accommodating to us. So we're looking forward to that program, and Naomi can tell you a little bit about that.
Well, the Cerrito had to fit us into their busy schedule, so instead of doing a whole week of shows like we normally do, we are streamlined down to 3 screenings of shorts. So there's our eco films and environmental films are going to be shown on Thursday, October 12th. And that will be at night at 7. And then we have 2 days on Saturday morning at 10 and Sunday morning at 10, the 14th and 15th of just our usual eclectic group of short films, which I think everyone will enjoy, at least several of them. And we hope you can join us there. And we also have a gala an awards gala where we're presenting our usual. We have 6 or 7 awards from Best Film, Best Doc, Best Narrative, and then we have our Social Justice Award film that we are presenting for the 2nd year in a row. So we're excited about that one.
And that awards gala will be in Albany.
Right.
That will be on Solano Avenue at Zaytoon. Hopefully someone from the city will be there. We'd like someone from the city to present the award for Best Film. And I know Mayor Tiedemann did that last year. We appreciate that. So anyway, we hope to see you there. It's going to be a good show.
Yeah, we're going to have fun.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comment. Any other folks in the room? Not? Any folks online? You can press *9 or the raise your hand button via Zoom. I see one.
So I'd like to just provide public comment on a concerning issue that arose in adjacent Berkeley that I think also is something that Albany should look out for, and that is the eviction filing notices that is threatening the elders on fixed incomes and seniors. It turns out that in Berkeley, which has been tracking eviction notice filing since Berkeley lifted the moratorium, that for the month of September, this last month, that 68% of the eviction notices that was provided to renters and to these seniors came from a nonprofit called SAHA, and they provide housing to seniors. However, the nonprofit doesn't seem to be as efficient as private housing providers. They have a very high overhead cost. They have staff and salary cost, and staff don't do the work themselves, like plumbing and painting and electrical, that local housing providers, mom and pops do. So the expense is more. So they had to make them the numbers pencil out, and that meant they had to provide eviction notices and threaten to kick all these seniors out. Of the 112 eviction notices that came out, like I said, 68% from Saha was to these seniors. So this was very alarming. So going forward, to protect these seniors, we need to figure out a very efficient housing system, and nonprofits don't necessarily provide efficient system of housing, especially if they have to rely on heavy taxpayer subsidies and also have to exempt themselves from property taxes. And even with that, they can't make their numbers meet. And we also need property taxes for city services. So going forward, if you think about, moving rental property from private ownership to nonprofit or social housing, the efficiency of that housing model needs to be looked at, because there are different options, but you want the best tool, not just the bluntest instrument that is available, which, it doesn't seem like there's accountability when you're evicting seniors at that rate. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for your comment. If there are any other folks online who would like to comment, please raise your hand. Seeing none, that will take us to our consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered routine by the city and will be enacted by one motion unless otherwise stated. By approval of the consent calendar, we adopt the staff recommendations, and we will not have separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests that discussion. Are there any council members who would like to pull an item for separate discussion from the consent calendar?
7576, just for a brief comment.
Seeing no others, are there any members of the public who would like to pull an item from the consent calendar for separate discussion? Seeing none, we will go to 75.
Yeah, I want to thank public works staff who are involved for pulling off these two complexly interrelated projects. These projects were the re-signalization of Masonic/Greenway with Solano and Marin, and the repaving of Marin and part of Masonic. Marin between, I'm going to get this right, Albert and Key Route? Cornell and Key Route? Cornell and Key Route. Yeah, so very complex projects, different contractors working in the same area, so I really thank you for your work.
Thank you. And while we're on the subject, if the staff knows this offhand, we're finishing up that work on any additional work that's happening on parts of Marin. Do we have a idea when all of that work might be done?
I'm Allison Carrillo, CIP manager. It looks like within the next month. It won't be ongoing work. This is kind of the final work to decommission the signal cabinet that we had some issues with, along with making sure that the PG&E power connections are done. And that's just a matter of getting PG&E lined up. So anticipate in the next month or so, we'll be wrapping up that project as well, the signal project.
Great, thank you very much. Was that your comment on 7.5 and 7.6?
No, 7.6, I just want to do.
Go ahead.
Okay. Want to thank staff for the bid process and just note that the engineer's estimate, well, the lowest responsible bid came in a little bit below the engineer's estimate. So congratulations on that. It's great when the engineer's estimate is pretty close to and a little above the lowest responsible bid in terms of planning. So good work and thank you.
Great. Unless there are any other comments, I will entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
I will move the consent calendar.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. City Clerk, can we please call the roll?
Councilmember Hanson Romero,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mickey,
Yes.
Mayor Tiedemann.
Yes.
Reese.
Thank you. That brings us to our presentation this evening. Item 8.1, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, program update.
Okay, good evening, Council. Mayor Tiedemann. I'm Isabelle Leduc, Assistant City Manager. This staff report provides a status update on programs funded with American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which I will be calling ARPA from now on. The last update you received was in October 2022, so we are back a year later to give you an update on what we've been doing with the funding and the programs that we have implemented. So just a little bit of background. On March 11, 2021, the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, was signed into law. The ARPA provides aid to state, tribal, and local government for public health and economic recovery due to COVID. The City of Albany was allocated a little over $4.7 million. And the city has, council has allocated most of the funding, which must be expended by December 2026. Expenditures are on track with 40% or $2.2 million expended to date. Do we have the slide? So this provides a little bit of the information that I just provided. As directed by Council, funds have been used to implement temporary COVID public assistance and small business assistance programs. Council has approved an allocation also towards the city's cybersecurity infrastructure improvement. The programs are all fully funded with ARPA and are anticipated to continue into 2024. The extended timeline of ARPA funding through December 31, 2026 allows us to implement programs with an extended implementation period, which will result in a greater range of applicants and also overall program impact as we continue to evaluate the changing needs of the community. We've also created a webpage on the city website, which describes all of the ARPA-funded programs that we have to date. Yes, there it is. So if you look under each of the items under the accordion, in the accordion, you'll see a drop-down which describes each of the programs, and any link to web pages that have been created to the programs themselves. So now I will turn it over to Kate Miller, Recreation and Community Services Supervisor, to talk about the programs implemented under the COVID Public Assistance Program. She'll provide more information on that aspect of ARPA funding, and then Brennan Brown will provide information on the Business Assistance Program.
Well, thank you. Good evening. Kate Miller, and I've been working on the implementation of the ARPA public assistance programs and assisting Albany Cares as well, and doing some community engagement. I'd like to just briefly share some additional details about the public assistance programs. We have the community grocery program. We've been running almost 2 years now, and that program provides Albany households a grocery bag and household items bag on the first Friday of each month at the community center. Participation has significantly increased from the program's start. In the last year, we've averaged about 130 participants a month. In total, we've distributed nearly 1,950 grocery bags and almost 2,500 essential items bags. Overall, we've served 258 unduplicated individuals that have received groceries. And about 75% of those participants have come at least 3 times to the program. From client self-reporting, we can say that about a quarter or a little more of our participants are seniors, and then nearly 75% of participants have indicated that they're very low income or extremely low income, which means that their income is at or below 50% of area median income. Next, I wanted to talk a little about the Friendship Subsidy Program. This was launched last fall and has provided children participating in the city's Friendship Club after-school program with subsidies or discounts off their tuition. And depending on a family's income, the family can receive 25% to 75% off of their monthly tuition for each child in their family or participating in the program. The average subsidy in that has been families qualifying to get 50% off of tuition, so about $2,000 to $3,000 over the course of a year. We've provided last year 7 subsidies during the school year for a total of $16,700, and this year, so far, we've approved 6 subsidies for about $15,000. We were excited last summer to expand the program to our full-day friendship camp program and our junior counselor program as well. And eligible camp participants received 50% off camp fees for up to 10 weeks of camp. The program was widely utilized. We had 31 children receiving subsidies over the course of the summer. And over 75% of the families that did receive a subsidy for camp signed up their children for 2 or more weeks of camp. And we heard from several families that the subsidy enabled them to sign up their children for more than 1 week or to participate at all. We also, with expanded additional ARPA funding, we've continued with Albany Project Hope, expanding our scope to assist individuals who are experiencing homelessness in Albany. This has included rapid rehousing funds, a master lease on additional house, and some flexible funding for the various needs of the clients. Project Hope has continued its basic model of initial and regular outreach to clients throughout the city, assisting them with their immediate needs and then ongoing housing navigation services. The ARPA funding has allowed the service levels to remain consistent and for flexibility to address the needs of our clients experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about our rental assistance and debt relief programs, which we launched last spring. And we're broadly marketing this as a renter's assistance program or a renter's financial assistance program, and the 2 programs are kind of underneath that umbrella. The program is making resources available to low-income Albany tenants who are either behind on rent, are at risk of falling behind on rent, or have accumulated shadow debt in order to pay rent, pay for food, or other household expenses. And shadow debt can include credit card, payday loans, even loans to family. The program has been steadily increasing and building over the last 6 months. Our outreach has ramped up over time. For all programs that I've been discussing now, we have distributed flyers and tabled at events and made announcements in the e-news, created the web pages that was mentioned, outreach to other organizations that serve many of our clients. Particular to the Renters Assistance Program, though, we did develop a postcard that was sent out to all known rental properties over the summer, and we did see an increase in participation with that. We'll be continuing our outreach efforts over the next year. We anticipate continued uptake of the program. As you can see on the slide, we've made nearly 40 referrals to Echo Housing, which is the nonprofit that's assisting us with the program. And they help determine eligibility and complete the application process. Of those 14 applications that have been approved so far, the majority have been approved for rental assistance, averaging about $7,800 per household. There have been some outliers on the higher end and a few on the lower end. 2 of the applicants have received funds to assist directly with debt relief. And 2 have received funds for security deposit and 2 months of rent for a more affordable housing arrangement. And there's several applications that are still pending. We've found that nearly all our applicants for these programs are actually making their rent and have not received notices of eviction. However, they're on the margin and they're close to becoming delinquent on rent due to various financial hardships. In this way, the programs helped people stabilize their financial situation before reaching the point where they may lose their housing. And then I'll just close by saying that overall, these various ARPA public assistance programs have really allowed Albany Cares to provide an expanded level of services to community members and have given us an opportunity to really understand or better understand what issues our residents are facing. And over the next year, we'll continue to evaluate what we're hearing from community members and adjust our efforts as needed. Happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation, and I'll hand it over to Brennan Brown.
Good evening, Council. Brennan Brown. And I'm going to be providing some information on Albany's ARPA-funded economic development programs to support Albany businesses. Some of this information I presented at our last meeting, so this might be, some of it is an abridged version. The city has, I will start with our grant programs. The city has administered 4 grant programs to help address specific needs identified within our business community, with a total of $1,022,190 awarded to local businesses, equating to a total of 86 grant awards to date. The 4 grants are the COVID Small Business Assistance Grant, the Window and Door Repair Grant, the Parklet Grant, and the Business Attraction and Improvement Grant. The COVID Small Business Assistance Grant was launched on April 8, 2022 to help Albany small businesses that endured long mandated closures and that were hardest hit by the pandemic. Grants ranging up to $20,000 were awarded to 67 businesses. The Window and Door Repair Grant was established to support businesses and nonprofits impacted by an increase in crimes in vandalism and crimes of vandalism and break-ins over the winter months in 2022 and 2023. 13 Albany businesses with storefront properties were able to apply for up to $2,500 in reimbursement funds on repairs to windows and doors due to vandalism and break-ins. The Parklet Grant, which is a grant currently available, is intended to assist businesses with parklets and the business community as a whole by offering financial support to bring the parklets up to code, both in design and safety compliance. The Business Attraction and Improvement Grant is intended to attract new businesses in Albany, fill vacant spaces in Albany and in commercial areas, and give business owners financial support to overcome startup and facility upgrade costs as they look to grow their business in Albany. This grant is currently only available to businesses moving into a new space, but will be broadened to include current Albany businesses looking to upgrade their locations. The grant programs have been well received so far, and we look forward to completing the implementation of the Parklet Grant and Business Attraction and Improvement Grant. The e-gift card program was introduced in 2022 during Albany Local Week to encourage community members to shop in Albany, thus supporting our local business community. During the onset of this program, a special feature was included wherein those purchasing a gift card would receive a matching gift card amount. The program was incredibly popular, and as of today, over $110,000 have been redeemed supporting Albany businesses. And under business-related events and marketing campaigns, Albany Local Week is one way that the city works to promote our local business community. During Albany Local Week, the city promotes events and pop-ups occurring within Albany, many hosted by the businesses. This year, the city provided businesses with complimentary Albany local business window clings to promote Albany's commercial areas and encourage customers to continue shopping locally in Albany. The city has also engaged in advertising efforts to promote Albany's commercial areas with street banners that were recently installed along Solano, San Pablo, and Buchanan Avenues. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation, and with that, we're happy to take questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from council? I have some. I usually don't have to start. Do we have any more details on, I forget the exact numbering, but it said we've had 30-something applications for the rent and debt relief, and 14 have been approved. Do we have any more info that we can share of why all of those haven't been approved? Are they just going through the process? Are people being rejected? Is there sort of any common reason, or is it a variety?
Happy to answer that. So we've had over 40 sort of initial inquiries that come to the Recreation and Community Services Department first. We do initial intake or screening. Out of all of those, 37 have been sent on to Echo Housing. In those cases, it's usually, the person sort of doesn't want to go forward. So, tell them to call back if they need to, but then we make a referral to Echo Housing. So out of those 37, the 14 that were approved, there was 10 that were not approved, and the rest are pending, essentially. So it can take several weeks to get through the application process, and Echo Housing takes their time with really reviewing documentation and answering people's questions. The cases where we would say closed, many of them are sort of pending close. People just didn't finish their application. So they're welcome to re-engage when they're ready, as long as obviously we have funds and work at continuing our programming. There's been a couple cases where people were over sort of a savings limit. They really had substantial, significant savings. They might be income-wise, not meeting that threshold, but as Echo, delved into their financial situation with them and really talked through their situation, they discovered that they are, significantly, able to weather whatever storm they're going through. That's just been a couple cases, but that has come up. And then there's been a couple where there's sort of approved pending that they can really show that they're going to be able to navigate their financial situation. So they have a plan. Are they going to, how are they going to bring in enough funding after this money runs out to keep going in their current unit? They've been potentially approved for the security deposit and rent, and sort of going through the process of maybe finding more affordable housing. And so in that case, they're sort of just pending, and some people don't. A few cases have just decided not to go forward with that.
Great. Thank you for that detail. And there are a lot of people who haven't finished the application, and do we send anything to them reminding them of you have an unfinished application if you'd like to finish it?
Yes, definitely. I think we're really trying to be as flexible as possible with people, really understanding their situations. The applications actually really tried to design it to be as least burdensome as possible, but there is, you have to do budget, income and expenses. There is some documentation required, and some people, I think it's potentially just can be a bit overwhelming and take some time. Echo Housing has been great about following up. In some cases, I've followed up because you do that initial intake with the client, so really, made a connection and then, sort of re-engage with them and say, hey, Echo House is waiting for your application. Is there anything we can do to assist? And we have in some cases helped people. Sometimes it's a technology issue or something, so kind of trying to help people navigate that.
Great, thank you. And then are we cross-promoting some of this at all? So, like, for example, it seems to me if we have the grocery program, which people go back to, and we have a high chance of people being lower income when they're interacting with it, are we using that ever to promote the rent or shadow debt relief program, as that's a likely place that people might, a population that might need it?
Yes, we've sort of moved from our soft launch to a more active outreach on the debt relief and rental assistance program. So now we are providing flyers to community grocery program participants and doing some of the cross-talking. We've also advertised some Mercy Brown Bag participants at the senior center. So you're trying to really kind of bridge some of those. A lot of times it is the same clients that need multiple programs. So we're doing that more actively, I would say, with our grocery community participants. This Friday, for example, we have CalFresh coming from Alameda County Social Services Agency. They'll be tabling while we're handing out where it's the grocery program. And so we'll also have the flyers about the rental assistance and be talking to people about it.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions from council?
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't think to send this question in beforehand, so understandable if you don't have an answer, but I'm curious where spending is at relative to allocations, and I don't remember the allocations the city made, so I can't take the numbers that you give us and convert them to percent allocation. The particular point of this question is to consider whether some reallocation might be needed now that you're into operating all these programs and you kind of have more of an idea where they're going. Thank you.
Yes, we've basically spent about $2.2 million so far, so 47% of the funding has been expended. So we feel that expenditures are on track, and we feel like we need another year probably with the current programs to see how the spending, how we do with the spending, and maybe next year we may come with some other options or depending on how the current programs are going. But so far, we haven't another 3 years to spend the money, and we're already almost halfway there. So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to expend on time. And as Kate mentioned, we're continuing to evaluate the needs of the community as we're providing the services that we're implementing. And if we find that there's a new need, we would come to you for a reallocation if needed.
Great, thanks. I guess I was curious more of spending versus allocation within each program rather than overall, which again, I don't expect you to have that on hand, but I think that'd be useful information to have, because my sense, which may be wrong, is that the allocation for business support is over 47% spent. I could be wrong.
That's correct.
Yeah, and the allocation for social support is then way less. So I'm just trying to get a feel for where are these going, and are the buckets, each bucket filled adequately, or does some
Speak
adjustment?
to a couple of the programs. I mean, with the Friendship Subsidy Program, we have spent over 30%, and we're now, given the success of the Friendship Camp, providing subsidies for our campers. We're definitely planning to do that again next summer. We've also extended it to our seasonal winter camp and spring camps that are offered to children, and as well as our ongoing junior council program. So finding ways to really offer the subsidies to multiple participants in that program, so not just the after-school program. So I see that spending as continuing on track. And then the debt relief and rental assistance programs were over $100,000 spent. There was a substantial allocation for that, but again, I think we're really anticipating continued outreach and continued applicants for that program over the course of the next year or two or more. Could next year reevaluate whether we maybe need to change the focus or expand in a different way to expend those dollars, but it seems like the uptake is definitely consistent.
And to add a clarifying question on top of that, the debt and rent relief program started a fair bit later than the business assistance. So if that is slightly less subscribed, that may make some sense right now and goes to
That's a great
the
point.
point
So we're 6 months, 6 months in.
There was also, for the business program, there was also pretty clear needs that we identified based on the closures. And so it was we understood how to spend some of that money pretty quickly.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Are there any members of the public in the room or online? Seeing none, we will bring back to council deliberations. Any council comments?
I was just going to say thank you for all the efforts and work and, really looking at different ways to implement this funding and stuff. So I appreciate all that. Thank you.
I want to say with the example of the friendship subsidy program, if it's 30% spent, and I'm not sure how far in it is, maybe a few months, but summer's more intensive spending. Please make sure to come back if it starts to get towards 80% level so that we can consider reallocating and keeping it going.
I want to thank staff for all the work they've been doing and the flexibility they've had in the program and making sure that we're addressing our community's needs. I think the thing that is probably on the shoulders for us as council members is what happens when the ARPA funding ends and which can we find funding to continue many of these programs. So.
Stole my point. Yes, I think a big part of this is figuring out how we're going to continue all of these things when we don't have this lovely pot of money from the federal government anymore. Hopefully they give us more. But I think what we're seeing tonight is a lot of, to not be so dour, a lot of unmitigated success on these programs. They have served a lot of people. They have been targeted to the people who need them. They've been providing things that we know we should be providing, like people's access to childcare, to food, to staying in their homes, to keeping their business open, all the things that we should be doing. So I'm really hopeful that I know we will keep getting updates on this and how to keep going, and hopeful that we can figure out ways to take what we've learned here and try and keep these programs going as much as we can. I also wanted to highlight one good thing I saw in the staff report that I don't think was mentioned here of we're not providing bags of food anymore. We're providing people with a card that they can use however they want. That's flexible, right?
Right, a grocery gift card of $50. Once a month they can receive that, yes.
Which I think is a great change to make it, more flexible so that people can do, what they see fit with it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of really good work in here, and I want to especially thank staff for their flexibility in making this all as accessible as possible. I know I had a variety of conversations with staff when we were putting together the rent and debt program, so I really appreciate all that you guys have done to work on that and take some of my ideas and run with them. So it seems to be working well, and I really look forward to our next update on it. Unless there's any other council comments?
More, I just, as you were saying that with the food gift cards and stuff like that, I was part of the stopwaste.org last board meeting. There was an incredible presentation about food recovery and redistribution. And I was just wondering, have you been working with any of the partners on that aspect of food recovery and redistribution with Stop Waste? Because if not, I would highly recommend checking into some of those programs. There was an astonishing amount of, what was it, just from January 1st to December 31st of 22, 5,091 tons of food recovered from all T1 and T2 donors. pretty incredible. So I would definitely suggest connecting with stopwaste.org and maybe being able to utilize and supplement some of our programs with some of theirs that they've got going on.
Thank you for the suggestion. We can look into that.
Any further comment? If not, thank you very much for the presentation, and we look forward to more updates in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will go to our unfinished business, the first of which is item 10.1, the first reading of our ordinance for filling a vacant seat on the City Council by appointment. Is this Anne?
Good evening, Council. The item brought before you is based on the Council's September 18, 2023 discussion on the framework for the procedure to fill a vacant seat on the City Council by appointment. Council directed staff to prepare an ordinance for the procedure and the vote counting of ranked choice voting election. So we have attached the proposed draft ordinance. One important note is that to amend any section of the Albany Municipal Code Chapter 7 on ranked choice voting election, the amendment would either need to be placed on the ballot of a general municipal election for the Albany voters to consider, or with the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of the 5-member City Council tonight. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions. The attorney can help too.
Thank you, and hopefully we're all familiar with this. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment? Also seeing none, I'll bring it back for deliberation. Is there any deliberation? If not, I will look for a motion.
I will move passage of ordinance 2023-05 on first reading, waiving the reading.
I will second. City Clerk, it has been moved and seconded. Can we please have the roll?
Just to clarify, it was introduction of.
Sorry, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I was looking for the waiving of first reading, but not the introduction bit.
Mayor Tiedemann,
Yes.
Councilmember Hansa Romero,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
and Vice Mayor Mickey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to our next item of unfinished business, which is item 10.2, which is a presentation on the possible revenue measures for funding of core city services.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be introducing the item, as well as our interim finance director, Cassie Murphy, sitting next to me, who will give you an overview of the staff report and follow up from your discussion study session, if you will, on June 20th, where we had a presentation regarding the opportunities for revenue in a very generic context. This drills down more into some of the items raised and also a reiteration of our focus on funding core services through our general fund.
Hello, Cassie Murphy, Interim Finance Director. As Nicole mentioned, this presentation serves as a continuation of the study from June of this year. Staff has conducted, as a group, a project across departments, and different staff members are going to speak in detail about the items related to their department and areas of expertise. And do you have the presentation? So you can start probably on 3. So just a quick overview on items of note and the current state of affairs within the city. The approved biennial budget is projected to run a deficit for both years. In fiscal year 2023-24, that deficit is $1.308 million. That projected deficit increases to $2.191 million in 2024-25. The UAL, which is our unfunded actuarial liability, is the largest contributing factor to that. The UAL is the city's obligation on the pensions of staff. The projected UAL for 2024, fiscal year 2024, is $2.9 million. Again, we see an increase in that in fiscal year 2025 to $3.497 million. So just with those numbers and the upcoming next 2 years in the current budget, we can see how that contributes to our current deficit. However, independent projections of the city's UAL shows it to increasingly grow over the next 10 years, and both independent projections have shown it growing to between $4 and $5 million. So while again it is something in the immediate need that needs to be considered, it is also an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. Another item of note is reserve funding. The council recognized the need to establish reserve funds earlier this year. And effective July 1st, 2023, $500,000 was appropriated to various reserves. Those reserve funds can be utilized for both anticipated and unanticipated costs across the city. That helps departments in maintaining the minimum level of services that our citizens request. It is ideal that fund reserves, or we appropriate fund reserves on a regular basis to supplement that. However, a budget with a deficit can make regular funding of reserves difficult since monies are being utilized for day-to-day operations. Thank you. Intention. So with those considerations in mind, staff feels that it is important to focus on revenue that supports the general fund, core services, and the existing deficit. Staff's aim is to first address revenue measures that have been determined to be a requirement to continue the operations that we are charged to uphold. And a broader effort is placed on measures which do not address as urgent a need, but must be funded to maintain the financial health of the city and continue operations at the level expected. Measures required to come to a vote will be proposed to be placed on upcoming ballots in 2024-26 with the level of urgency considered. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Devora.
Thank you, Cassie. Good evening, Council. Devora Zauderer, Public Works Program Manager. Great. So you've seen me here before to talk to you about infrastructure funding in different capacities. But today, I want to talk about how funding our infrastructure is absolutely key, both for being able to deliver the quality of life and services that our residents expect, and for funding them in such a way that relieves pressure on the general fund. In general, our infrastructure funding, a large portion of our infrastructure funding are special revenues, are dedicated funding sources that are designed for a specific infrastructure system. In our planning and our financial planning, we balance those funding sources between our operations and maintenance needs and our capital improvement needs. In general, how we plan, we match the most stable funding sources to the most consistent needs throughout the city, such as we will always have paving to do every year, we will always have sewer rehabilitation to do to maintain our system, and that funding itself must have longevity and conditions built in so it can keep up with rates of inflation. So to sum up about special revenues, we want to design our funding for these purposes to relieve pressure on the general fund and to be able to stabilize the kind of stewardship we want to continue to deliver in caring for our core infrastructure. So one piece of that is often unglamorous and not the first thing on folks' minds is our sanitary sewer system, which is, and our current funding for this program, for this infrastructure system, is through our sewer fees. The sewer fees are outlined in or the system for levying sewer fees is outlined in Chapter 15 of the Albany Municipal Code. And the sewer fees fund both operations and maintenance and our capital improvement program for sewer rehabilitation. Now, this program is or our sewer system is subject to a consent decree issued by the US EPA, and those regulations stipulate that we must deliver Annually, we must deliver work with a certain linear footage of rehabilitated pipeline, I believe through 2030. And in order to keep up with that, we have to deliver sewer projects annually, in addition to keeping up with our normal operations and maintenance responsibilities. Now, with our current sewer fee, we perform rate studies on a regular basis. The last one was performed in 2017, with the results of which were that an annual increase by Consumer Price Index was, or CPI, was approved for a 5-year period from 2017 to 2022. That, of course, has now expired, and our sewer fees are no longer increasing annually to keep up with inflation. Next slide, please. So the next steps, that is not going to be sustainable for long, because we do have, as I said, the regulatory requirements to keep up with on the capital side and the operations and maintenance side with, as a sewer system ages, operations and maintenance go up. So we need to keep up with that cycle in order to maintain our system in good health and maintain our costs at a regular level. So what do? Our next steps are to engage a consultant to perform a rate study, which will include both appropriate recommendations for Consumer Price Index or CPI increases annually, as well as we're due for somewhat of an analysis on our rate structure. We want to ensure that it is modern, it is equitable, and that it makes sense with how our sewer system operates. We would then bring the results of this study to the council and recommend updates and perform a public hearing in line with the Prop 218 process for adjusting fees. This will be taking place over this next several months. In order to have it on the fiscal year 25 tax rolls, we would need to have everything signed, sealed, delivered to the county by August 1st of next year. So you will see the results of our study and next steps likely about April or May of the upcoming year. This particular funding can take place independent of the election cycle, but considering the expiration of the previous CPI conditions and the steady requirements for construction, as well as upcoming potentially quite large projects, this is something that needs to happen imminently. Okay, thank you. A second of our infrastructure systems that is often overlooked, because as much of our infrastructure, if we don't notice it, that's a good thing. But our storm drain system is currently funded in 2 ways. We have our NPDES fee, which supports our operations and maintenance programs in public works. And then we have the Measure F street and storm drain parcel tax, which was passed, in 2006. What staff has investigated and come to understand through our budgeting process is that at this time, our operating costs far exceed annual revenues from that fee. And the parcel tax is not appropriate to fund operations. It's for funding our capital programs. Now, the program itself is subject to conditions of the county municipal regional stormwater permit. The version 3.0 of that permit was updated in 2022, and the implications of that permit are that the program activities will be required to expand. In large part, this is due to increased requirements for green infrastructure to be added on to capital projects, to be maintained and as part of maintenance programs, of course. So we are expecting to see increases in our maintenance program as well as on the capital side, essentially from this fiscal year onward. Though the sort of increases, we're still developing, and we'll bring more information to council as we receive it and during this assessment process. But already before those increases, our the costs of that program have outpaced the revenue that we're bringing in. So the NPDES fee that's because the NPDES fee has not been updated since fiscal year 1999 to 2000. It was originally established in the early 90s as a response to the financial impacts of implementing the Alameda County Urban Runoff Clean Water Program. The program activities have expanded since then outside of just the requirements of the county program, and activities, there are no provisions in place, even CPI, to increase the revenue associated with that fee. So our next steps with our storm drain fees, as we discussed some of this in our presentation in June, but our next step is similar to sewer, where we will engage a consultant to perform a rate study on this NPDES fee and present options both for modernizing the scope, the potential rate structure, and potentially other options for, if needed, to fund this program. We would then bring this to council, discuss options, and this would potentially go to the voters in November 2024, depending on, in one way or another, depending on what is presented from the study and what is discussed at that point. So we expect to proceed with that study essentially now, and we'll likely return to the council in the spring to discuss next steps there. The third of the biggest funding, and in my sense, most emergent funding needs at this moment, and most distinct next steps in this sort of long-term effort to ensure the city's financial foundation is secure, is to relieve, because I guess I'll say one more thing about storm drain, which is that at this time, we have this revenue from the NPDES fee, but the remainder, the delta between what that revenue is and the cost of operating our program is a drain on the general fund. Of course, we need to deliver this program. These are not necessarily negotiable activities, and moving through this rate study and potential fee increases will help to relieve that pressure. So our sidewalk program, which you also may know by, it's the annual Sidewalk Rehabilitation Program, which is programmed and budgeted through our CIP process, is currently funded by the Measure P1 Sidewalk Parcel Tax, which was passed in 2016. It was a 10-year time horizon, and the collection expires at the end of, or the tax itself expires at the end of December 2026. The program itself has been very much a success. We have completed 6 phases so far of critical repairs identified as part of a citywide comprehensive survey on sidewalk defects. We have a Phase 7 project in construction at this time, and we expect Phase 8 to be constructed in winter to spring 2024. However, so while we've completed, and this completes the scope of critical repairs identified by that survey, that while that top tier of critical repairs has been completed, there are other tiers of repairs that have been identified as necessary by this survey, and so there is continuous work that is required to maintain sidewalks in good condition throughout the city. So that survey is on approximately a 5-year cycle, and a new survey will be performed in fiscal year in 2025, which would inform future planning for future projects in this program. This program is also subject to stipulated legal requirements. The city settled in an ADA lawsuit, and that also informs certain deadlines and conditions upon projects that must be constructed. At this time, it is recommended that we renew the sidewalk parcel tax. We ask for our voters' buy-in to ensure service delivery and continue to improve this essential infrastructure system. So our next steps would be here to prepare the renewal measure for the 2024 ballot. And there's, as there has been some discussion in our previous meeting regarding options for expansion of scope or adjustment for the future, we would engage on a number of topics. We would want to engage a municipal advisor to help explore options for expansion or alternate funding in the further future. And then of course, as I mentioned, our other next step is to update the public right-of-way survey and integrate that data into future projects. So you will continue to see that. I've noted summer 2024 here as that is traditional for election prep, but you will see that likely around that time. So two items that are in progress right now, but that we're not necessarily recommending for, or that we haven't brought as revenue measures for the 2024 election, are our street lighting infrastructure and our street tree infrastructure. Both of these have planning or evaluation in process. And at this time, for example, the street lighting evaluation we had a lighting workshop on September 19th, which went very well. Video of that is available on our website. The consultant has put together technical memos and is working on the remainder of the evaluation with our staff. We're estimating that evaluation will be completed in early 2024, and subsequent steps would be to essentially analyze how this evaluation will, to assess potential projects coming out of that evaluation, to identify new needs and best practices, and essentially to take that evaluation and that data and let it feed and have it feed into future planning efforts. And of course, to do a cost analysis of different scenarios that are possible based on our consultants' evaluation of the state of our system. With street trees, at the September 5th meeting, the council awarded a consultant contract for the street tree management plan, and you can expect an upcoming study session on the topic, as well as ongoing community engagement throughout this process. This will also be completed in 2024, and out of the management plan, we would be doing the same thing. We want to identify how we can improve our programs, what those costs will look like, and then potential larger scale or more targeted projects. In general, for both of these things, it is likely that there will be additional funding needed. However, at this time, due to the evaluation and planning processes that are in progress, it's premature to propose any kind of distinct funding effort for this infrastructure. But we will continue to monitor this, and both the evaluation and the plan will continue to be brought to you as needed and for informative updates. And as costs become more clear, staff will continue to recommend to the council potential funding opportunities. And that ends my discussion on infrastructure, so I will pass it back to Cassie.
Thank you, Devorah. Wanted to discuss business license tax with the council. This is a revenue stream that we've identified could use with an update. The original resolution 87-101 setting the tax was signed January 22nd, 1988. Without an update, we are only able to increase the tax annually. That annual increase is based on the June Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, so the June CPIW each year. In addition to that restriction, the tax is also regressive. So what that means is businesses' income is not considered when the tax bills are generated. To address both of those factors, analysis was completed in 2022 by consultant NBS and staff. The attempt of that analysis was to address the limitations of the ordinance and move away from that regressive nature of the tax. The goal of the analysis was to move towards a gross revenue method for calculating the tax, and that was identified as a means to both promote equity among the businesses within the city, but also a method of increasing revenue for the city. However, there were concerns after that study was presented to council with whether or not that would unfairly impose a tax on certain businesses. So to address that, staff is going to review the previous analysis from 2022, take those points into consideration, and see if with new analysis on top of the existing analysis, we can recommend something that feels more equitable, which was in line with the intention of the initial study in part. And I'm going to wrap up by discussing bond measures. We are in the early stages of doing research into bonding measures as a potential means of funding major items. Coordination with a municipal financial advisor is a must to ensure that proper assessment is done on all factors and the potential impacts of incurring debt are considered. Some considerations for bonding, one being that the city repays for several years plus interest, so this is a long-term obligation that would be entered. In addition, the city does have a debt limit, and that debt limit cannot be exceeded regardless of the nature of the item that that debt was incurred for. So that limit is calculated based on the May assessor's estimate of the city's assessed value, and based on that assessed value, it is 3.75%. In addition, Albany Unified School District may issue debt that counts against the city's debt limit. So with that considered, staff recommends bond opportunities be utilized towards essential functions such as capital improvements, required maintenance and rehabilitations, or to address the UAL function. And on UAL, there is a special type of bond called a pension obligation bond, and that could be utilized to address the growing UAL that the city faces in coming years. The UAL will pay down the existing debt to CalPERS at a point in time. However, more consideration need to be made that after that pay down is done, a future UAL may be considered or may be created. The debt still does exist, it is just shifted to the bond. And the structure of the pension obligation bond may extend the repayment, and it also, again, locks the city into long-term debt. That being said, a pension obligation bond option can be used alongside other strategies, and if we do that, it could potentially mitigate the risk and increase the benefit of incurring the debt to pay down debt. Some other items that could be considered are utilizing reserves and increasing the payroll contribution rate. And the Financial Advisory Committee will be reviewing a debt policy this year. We are planning to bring it to them in December. So staff is working on that so that that can move forward and then go to council. Okay, so in summary, staff has work to do. We are going to be performing rate studies, preparing measures, and engaging advisors and consultants to assist us with our next steps.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions from council?
First, thank you for being our interim financial director. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
At a distance. Let's see here. So there was mention that the NIPID's fee change, authorization would need to go to voters. My understanding is the sewer fee change does not need to go to voters. So I don't know, maybe you could expand on why the difference between those two.
I will preface, or I will disclaim this by saying I'm not a Prop 218 expert, but as with many things in this process, we learn as we go. As for Prop 218, the sewer fee does not need to go to voters. There does need to be a public hearing. Storm drain is not explicitly outlined in Prop 218, and therefore it is, I may defer to our legal counsel about more detail about that, but it is likely that any adjustments to that fee will need to go to the voters.
Right, bummer. This may seem unrelated, but is Measure K reform targeted to go to the ballot in 2024? That's one of our housing plan items, I think. I think it was in one of the phases there. Our housing element study.
Good evening again, council members. Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. Probably not. I think what we need to evaluate is whether in effect, the rezoning that would be created by taking a measure to the ballot would require environmental review before we take it to the ballot. So it would only be in the unlikely event that we conclude that environmental review is not required, but I think it probably is.
Thank you. And I guess just for anybody who's listening, Measure K is, please correct me if I get this wrong, is the specific plan regarding 11 acres, the 11-acre private parcel on Albany Hill?
As a practical matter, what's left of Measure K that's applicable to today is that 11-acre private parcel, yes.
Okay, so it covered more than that.
At one time, it covered more than that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did have a question as far as, thank you for all of this. This is quite detailed. Wanted to know, because I'm always curious, I think in some of our infrastructure improvements in the past have also been covered by some grants as well. Are we continuing to move forward in researching out any particular grants that might be able to ease up any of this as well?
That's a great question. Thank you. We do have a strong grants program. You've seen before in some of the budget documents, et cetera, that we have a consultant who helps us on applications, et cetera, which is great for augmenting the resources that staff has. In general, we do for discrete projects, either on the planning side or through our CIP, we do seek out grants. In general, grant funding is much better for standalone projects and for projects that have a discrete beginning and end. And for these ongoing programs, we run into the problem that a couple of you identified with the ARPA funding, which is that when the funding runs out, what happens to our programs? So in general, we try to match the programs that will have consistent, distinct commitments and delivery parameters for the long term. We try to match those with long-term consistent funding. But we do utilize grants, as mentioned earlier in the Albany Hills Survey. With the Albany Hills Survey, we currently have a grant with the Coastal Conservancy helping develop a plan for Albany Hill for the future, and so we do leverage those as well.
Great. And I guess the other question that I would have is, now that we're working more, I don't know how you would say it, more specifically with focusing in some economic development as well, trying to figure out some more revenue streams and stuff like that. Are you guys working together with that department to kind of say, hey, these are some of the funds that we think that we're going to need, and how can we proactively look for additional funding resources?
I will say that I coordinate semi-regularly with Brennan on economic development, specifically geared towards business licenses and analyzing the data that we have and where areas of growth could potentially be. So that's something I've worked with economic development on in recent times.
Great, thank you very much.
Any further questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Anyone online? Seeing none there, we will come back to council deliberation. Any council comments?
Yes, I have comments. Big surprise. So I, through previous exchange with the city manager and city attorney, I've been informed there's some sort of nebulous nexus regarding whether the debt limit for AUSD and the city are combined through a provision of the charter. I'm a little unclear if that's the case or not. I would say if it is the case, it would be good to program removing that from the charter. So I'll just bookmark that as something maybe staff can look into. Because it came up again tonight, it was mentioned again tonight that there might be impact of each of the agencies on each other's debt limit, and I think if that can be separated, that would be better for both the agencies for clarity. Business license tax, my interest is to tax gross revenue of businesses that provide primarily services. Businesses that provide primarily retail currently effectively are taxed through our sales tax measure of 0.5%. And so while the business doesn't pay it, the consumer is paying it. This is backwards of a lot of equity analysis where the higher the income of the household, the more discretionary spending it has on services. So that's even retrogressive rather than regressive, even worse than regressive. And so to tax those service-oriented businesses, at a similar sales tax rate, to the extent that makes sense. Obviously, it'll be nuanced and it won't make sense in some cases. And not to do the same for businesses that do retail, and potentially to cut the existing tax, which is a per employee tax for small retail businesses to help them be more viable. On the sewer fee, I have a preference for NBS presented that I think it was for Sausalito, but it was the city of Marin, that they worked with that city at its request to develop an approach of calibrating the fee that each entity pays to its winter water use, which they took as representative of the amount of sewerage or the volume that they were putting into the sewer, which would be more equitable, and also bringing in an element of single residential property versus multi-residential property. So the amount of sewer main that amortizes to each single residential property is considerably longer than it is to a multi-residential property. In other words, if you've got 5 apartment buildings on a 5,000 square foot lot, and my wife and I are fortunate to own a house on a 5,000 square foot lot, well, we have the same amount of sewer main, but we should be paying more, effectively, is what I'm saying, for our residents. I suppose another way of getting at that would be doing an element of property size or parcel size. On the property tax, the reauthorization of the property tax to fund sidewalk repair, I'm disheartened that we can't include anything about street lighting or street trees in that, but I understand the timing isn't working for that, and that it needs to go forward. So I would suggest expanding the allowable, what those funds could be spent on, still related to sidewalks, so grinding, which is something the city is already doing and paying for otherwise, building sidewalks that, or building up sidewalks that are substandard width currently. So there's quite a few sidewalks in the city that are only 4 feet wide, whereas the standard is 5 feet wide. And also consider allowing spending on maintenance of paths. So we don't have a dedicated funding source currently for the paths that we have proliferating around town and the shoulders to those paths. Let's see, street lighting. And this is a question motivated by it, but appearing in the report. Are replacement of failing luminaires, is that waiting until 3 years from now, 4 years from now, when we actually have new revenue source to pay for those?
Mark Hurley, Public Works Director. No, once we get some of the recommendations from the evaluation, we're going to go ahead and start replacing the failed and failing luminaires. There's a question on capacity what the county can replace. They're limited in what they can do, and then we have funding side. So we're going to have to work through what those numbers are, but we're not waiting on anything. There might be some, when we program a one-for-one replacement across the city, there might be some adjustments that we come for budgeting, but we'd also look at grants and so forth to help fund that. So there's probably a funding gap there, but it's not holding anything up, and we'll come to you and ask for with solutions on how we can close that gap.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if there's a policy decision to be made about, where in the city gets replacements first, I think that would be appropriate to come back to council, but I'm glad that's going to proceed. Thank you. Development impact fees, I know staff instituted an effort to update those fees, which have been the same since at least 2009, as far back as the records on the website go, so they've probably been the same for longer than that, while what they pay for is certainly increased in expense considerably. So my understanding that there's been a update study that's been ongoing, I think, with NBS. I'm curious when and if that might come back, because with all the housing encouragement we're doing, even though the market's not favoring it at the moment, at some point, hopefully we're going to get a wave of development, and we want to have those impact fees in the right place at that time.
Thank you again, Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. I'm managing that particular effort with NBS, and we're close to completion of it. There's a few more loose ends that I'm working with them on, but I would expect to have a draft hopefully in the next couple of months.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. While you're there, is it possible to have a CPI rider or element or provision in an impact fee adoption? So that we don't get out of date like we are now?
Right, I believe so. I would want to check with the city attorney just to make sure that we can do that, but I would hope that we have some methodology of escalating, whether it's CPI or some other, construction cost index adjustment.
Yeah, right. And great, thank you. Let's see, unsecured property on UC Berkeley land has not been paying property taxes. So this is Belmont Village, Sprouts, other small retail. UC Berkeley encouraged us to send them a bill, which apparently is what the city of Berkeley does, and I guess most of those entities pay. So I don't know, has the bill been sent, or are there plans to send a bill to those entities?
We analyze this through our city attorney's office. The majority of our parcel taxes don't include the language that would allow us to issue that bill, if you will, to those lease properties.
Interesting. So, yeah, I had in mind when they said that was that you send them the bill, you don't necessarily have the legal power to make it stick, but you send them the bill and they pay it out of the goodness of their heart, or they don't, or the shame of their heart. But you're saying we actually need to have some legal provision to even be able to send the piece of paper.
Correct.
Wow. Okay, and that's unfortunate. Well, hopefully we can correct that in at least future measures. All right. Obviously, I'm trying to hit every little bit of funding I've heard about over the time that I've been here. Another element that isn't in here is sugar sweetened beverage tax. So I've been engaged with a consortium of American Heart Association, policy nonprofit called In Advance, and Change Lab Solutions, who engaged me through the champion of this, which was former Mayor Nick Pilch. And they won a suit last spring that said that the state law that penalizes jurisdictions that adopt that tax, not Albany, because we adopted it before the bill, but adopt it going forward, would be penalized. And they won a suit saying that that cannot apply to charter cities. So our being a charter city, we are relieved of that. However, we weren't at risk anyway because of when we passed it. However, they think that there's a good case to be made for charter cities who have the tax to be able to now adjust the tax. They pretty sure that the industry will sue any city that tries to do that. They are seeking a grant from, I believe, the Bloomberg Fund to provide legal representation to any city that wants to go forward. And so if they get that grant, which they thought they would know about in November, I would be interested in putting a CPI adjustment, putting that tax on the ballot for the voters who approve a CPI adjustment, because obviously it was passed in 2016. It was 1 cent per ounce, so obviously the value of that cent has gone down over time. And if the tax had been CPI adjusted, it would be up to 1.2 cents per ounce, which, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot when you add it all up. And this would also provide, by increasing that amount by CPI, it would provide, or it would maintain the incentive for not consuming that product, which is really the goal of the tax, is to self-extinguish it, make itself no longer needed. I will say that since the first full year that the tax was levied to the last full year that we have revenue information for, the revenue from the tax has gone down 15%, CPI adjusted, which is good news. And there's a lot of research, not specific to Albany, but across the country. A lot of academics have looked into, you know, taking a control city and comparing it to a city who's actually had the treatment, and finding that cities that have these taxes are seeing a significant decrease in sugar consumption. And so that's somewhat what we're seeing here with this 15% decline. And so I just want to keep that tax fresh so we can keep that incentive there. And it will also help us pay for the escalating cost in crossing guards should we choose to keep doing that. And then the last thing I had, and I've expressed before, I have interest in a bond measure to potentially buy that 11-acre parcel on Albany Hill. So I just want to keep that in the mix. And that's what I have.
What to say after that?
What?
What to say after that? What more needs to be said? More importantly, what more needs to be said to make Jeff have to get up and walk over there and then walk back again? Thank you for looking at all this very in depth, as of course you would. I would agree with a lot of that, and say I'm especially appreciative of the efforts to explore our bonding capacity and how we can do bonds. I've long wanted us to do affordable housing bonding for a big project similar to buying that land. It's sort of, those two are tied together. So I want us to keep exploring that, even knowing that it won't be on this ballot. It might not be on the next one after that, maybe on the one after that. And even knowing that there's other bonding efforts, both at the school board level and at the regional level, that's ongoing while we are exploring it here. Otherwise, I think my main comment is it would be useful if as part of these next steps, when we keep looking at these, when we get to the point of being able to say how much some of these, if we keep moving with all of these, how much they start raising, if we can then look at, okay, if we're not taking that much extra out of our general fund, how much, if we can forecast a little bit outwards and look at how much are we getting towards not having that structural deficit anymore. And because that will then help us inform, do we need to be then even looking past all of these things? Because these are, as you guys said, the most emergent things that we really need to be doing. It may be that even once we do those, we need to just say, well, our general fund needs even more than that. And it would be good to be aware of that as soon as we can as we keep going through this process. Otherwise, I think this all looks like a lot of really, really very good work, and I'm excited to see all of it moving forward. Any other council comments?
Thank you for providing this information. I want to build off a little bit of what Councilmember Jordan was saying about the sidewalk parcel tax, and I'm extremely appreciative of staff working through the street lighting and street tree programs and the analysis that we'll get that, the programs we'll get from that, the cost estimates we'll get from that. I am a little concerned that 2024, we're looking at a sidewalk tax, potentially a storm sewer fee upgrade, and then the soonest we'd be able to go back for implementing street lighting, street trees, not sure what might or might not come out of the active transportation plan, that in 2026 would be the earliest for us to then go back to the voters again and ask for either a tax or a fee. And in my mind, I think of the sidewalk, street lights, street trees, and active transportation funding, depending on what that really means. It's really all talking about how we deal with our streets. And while I recognize this is not possible for 2024, I'd prefer to be going to the voters with one omnibus tax that says, hey, give us permission to spend this money across these 3 or 4 items. And every year or every few years, the priorities will change, but we have the flexibility to take care of everything you see above the ground, right, in our right-of-ways. And I fear that we will go in 2024 and ask for sidewalks when we have till 2026. And I know it's risky to not go, to wait till 2026, but that we'll ask in 2024 and then we'll ask again in 2026. And so I'm not opposed to us going for this 2024, but I want us to keep in mind that it's likely we will be going back in 2026 asking for additional funds. And do we want to make it one package or do we want to split it across multiple things? And in my mind, at least through the campaign, of those things that I mentioned, you can probably get most people to agree to 2 or 3 of them. They may not agree to 1 of them. And if we did an omnibus bill, I think it's harder for people to vote no. It's also a little more surety that, like, we're not going to come back every few years and ask for adding on a new tax, another tax. So.
Yeah, I can offer, that's my preference as well. It's an omnibus. And so my first inclination as I engage staff as well, let's just wait till 2026. And they made the good point, even if that wouldn't technically cause a funding gap, you know, it'd be close. Even if it technically didn't cause a funding gap, it would cause a program gap because they can't plan for spending money. You know, the planning for sidewalk repair has a lead time, and they've set up this program where there's planning, there's engineering, there's so on and so forth, and that has like a one year lead time. And so all that would come to a crashing halt, even if the funding doesn't stop. And that causes tremendous disruption. So they convinced me it's got to be 2024. That said, as painful as it is for me as somebody who's campaigned for 4 measures and run the campaign for 4 measures, and I don't like running campaigns that, you know, or for measures that are only going to last 2 years, but if the best that can be done is run the campaign in 2024 and then come back with an omnibus in 2026.
It would then incorporate.
The tax that hopefully is approved in 2024 as a 10-year tax. 2 years later, you come back and you incorporate it into the omnibus, and you also sweep in the Landscape and Lighting Assessment District 88-1. So you take those 2, you combine them into an omnibus, and you cover street light and street trees as well. I mean, I don't really want to run an extra campaign, but if that's the way the timing is, that's the way the timing is. So that's anyway where the discussion landed with staff.
To offer I want to say counterpoint, but worry of, I agree that an omnibus might be cleaner on its face in a lot of ways, and it may be that it's easier to pass, though I'm not sure about that. It may not be, because I think we have to be aware. I think you gain some benefit when we're thinking about what can we ask the voters to approve from saying we're not going to come back to you all the time. though we have limited ability to say that credibly because we do have to come back to them all the time. This is just the nature of running a city in California. But I think you also get some from specificity of what you're asking for. And I'll use an example. In Berkeley, it was a bond, so it was a little different, but their last bond failed, and I think part of the reason for that was it was not very specific about what they were asking for. It was housing and transportation and some other stuff. And so people said, what are you going to use this money for? It's not clear to me, and I don't have hard data to say that's why it failed, but I think it's something to be aware of. I don't want to put off doing these things now when we can and combine them in a way that, without looking, is that really more likely to have it actually succeed?
Yeah, I guess as much as I would like the omnibus, the point you raised, I believe in behavioral economics, it's found that people fear more than they love and they hate more than they love. So if there's a basket of 3 things and they hate one thing and they love the 2, they're going to vote based on the hate rather than the love. So that is to your point. If the more things you combine, the more hazard you create, that you reduce the viability of it. So, but that'll be a calculation for whoever's sitting here in 2025, 2026.
And I do like the approach of the idea of going and asking for us to renew the sidewalk, get that in place, and then come back with an omnibus. I just primarily look at it from a flexibility on staff standpoint, that there might be a year where we need to spend a lot of money on tree pruning, or we may do such a great job with our sidewalks that we can pause that for a little bit and we can spend money on streetlights. And I think that is what I would hope if we can get an omnibus pass, is that gives staff some freedom. It is a small sandbox that they get to work in, but they can't just spend it on anything. But it is very visible for anyone who walks around, bikes around, or drives around our community. It's everything above the sidewalk.
Oh, this is now off of this part of the subject. I'm going to roll into something else that I just popped back up into my head, and I've asked about it before, and I can't remember what the answer was, but it came up in a discussion with, I think it was one of the scout troops that's using Memorial Park, and how they're having trouble utilizing that building because the county has someone in there that's not been very easy to work with or able to get a hold of. And I do know that building has been brought up, that it's been for sale. Have we looked, and I know we talked about this a little bit, and I can't remember what the answer was, but looking into possibly purchasing it to run events out of for more income revenue from that.
Yeah, we have looked at it in the past a couple of times. We had some feasibility analysis done as well. It didn't line up very well in terms of the cost benefit because of the current status of the facility and all of the upgrades that would need to be done to the facility with regard to major seismic rehabilitation and ADA accessibility. It's certainly a feasibility study we could dust off in the future. I think the actual transaction was very nominal at the time from the county. We haven't necessarily engaged on the conversation in recent years.
If I can add a comment just about facilities management, facilities maintenance in general, the ongoing, aside from just the upgrade, or addition to the upgrades and the purchase price, the ongoing maintenance for adding another facility to our fleet of assets would be something to consider. And as we are currently trying to plan and stabilize funding for the assets that we currently own, you'll see that in the CIP update in the next year. That is something to consider, that would add additional maintenance costs that would be general fund costs on top of what we already have to commit to facilities maintenance.
Not to mention that we're, also short-staffed in a lot of ways, so always trying to find some funding to add in staff so that we can operate very much smoother than we, than wearing all these hats, so.
My understanding is the county owns the building, is that correct? And when you say it's for sale, is it like on the open market for sale? Or?
No, there were this is several years ago now, probably at least 10 years. There were conversations at one point in time of whether or not the city would like to assume responsibility for the facility, given that it's in a public park, but it is owned by the county. That conversation hasn't been broached in recent years.
Yeah, okay. And it never occurred to me to ask, but it does now. Is the property that it's on city property? So the building is owned by the county, but is the property owned by the city, or is it also owned by the county?
City property with a county building? It's
County building on city property?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting. I mean, given its state, their city isn't going to take it over. I don't know. It's since in the middle of our park, it seems like some sort of contingency plan for if the thing collapses in on itself at some point, or I don't know what the county's how bad the county's gonna let it get, but
they still facilitate use of it. So from their perspective, apparently it's usable. I would need to get more information on the current
presuming
status.
they're doing minimal maintenance on it to be able to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, and they have a lot of functions there, weddings and, all sorts of events, so.
Okay. I just didn't want a decrepit facility arriving in the middle of that park. Thanks.
Any further council comment? City staff, did you get what you needed? Great. Thank you all very much for the work.
Thank you.
And we will move on to our 2 items of new business. The first is 11.1, our updated salary schedule for City of Albany employees.
Council, you get to engage with a number of our department heads this evening. Our Human Resources Director.
Good evening, everyone. Council members, thank you very much. Penny Ha, Human Resource Director. Thank you for allowing me to present to you the staff report on updating the salary schedule that includes the negotiated salary adjustments for the Albany Police Officer Association, or known as APOA, employee classifications in accordance to the MOU. So the APOA MOU is in effect from November 2021 to October 2024, which reflects a 3% cost of living adjustment increase to the base salary for all classifications within the bargaining unit. In addition, we also would like to propose a 3% cost of living increase for unrepresented employees as well. While this increase are not part of an agreement, the city has historically tried to include the increases for the unrepresented that are comparable to employees covered by the bargaining unit. And please do note that fundings for both approved salary adjustments and the 3% cost of living adjustment for the unrepresented were part of the FY 2023 to FY 2025 biannual operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak? Seeing none, we will bring it back for council deliberation.
No deliberation, just thank you for presenting it, for being here, for staying the night and hearing all this.
It's okay. It's been enjoyable.
If there's no deliberation, I will entertain a motion.
Yes, I will move passage of resolution 2023-69.
I'll second.
Has been moved and seconded. City Clerk, can we please have the roll?
Vice Mayor Mickey,
Yes.
Mayor Tiedemann,
Yes.
Councilmember Hanson Romero,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan.
With thanks to staff, yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item 11.2, which is discussion of the conceptual design for the Jackson Street bikeway between Buchanan Street and Monroe Street.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Justin Freed, Transportation and Sustainability Manager. So, as the Mayor just said, I'll be discussing the conceptual design for Jackson Street. Next slide, please. A little context here. This is a segment of Jackson Street south of Buchanan, which is owned and maintained by University California, Berkeley. It is not a city street. Next slide, please. So early in 2021, UC Berkeley staff began finalizing project plans and developing initial designs for graduate student housing on the parcel of land at the northeast corner of Jackson and Monroe Street. Next slide, please. The active transportation plan, while it's in University Village, does envision active transportation network connections through the village, including this segment of Jackson Street we're discussing tonight. This segment would provide a number of benefits. It would help connect north-south bi-county cycling routes. It would improve access to recreation along the Bay Trail and recreational fields. And it would also improve access between University Village and the main campus. Next slide, please. And currently, with these discussions, Alameda County Transportation Commission began developing parallel bike improvements as part of the San Pablo Avenue Multimodal Corridor Program. We've received presentation on that a couple months ago. And as part of that program, it envisions improvements along Jackson Street as part of the parallel route identified there. Alameda County Transportation Commission recently allocated funding toward advancing design along this segment of Jackson Street to support this effort as part of the parallel route. Next slide. For a little additional context on how this connects to other efforts and phasing, the blue circle at the bottom there is Cornices Creek Phase 4, path connection that's now in the construction phase that the city is the lead on. The Jackson Street concept we're discussing tonight is likely to be delivered in 2 phases. One in the center darker red circle is adjacent to that graduate student housing. And so this is the segment that we're looking to accelerate the detailed design of, and with the goal of being able to deliver as part of the offsite improvements that the developer is going to be building in early 2024. We would then follow with a capital improvement project that would be delivering the segment north to connect to Buchanan and some on-street striping connections to the south, and with direction from UC, a future phase would tackle that section south of Monroe. Another context for the concept being presented tonight is that the Jackson and Monroe intersection is not part of the area of work of the development, and we've received direction so far from UC to leave the street trees along the corner of that intersection untouched by the project. So the concept we're presenting tonight provides connection from the bikeway to on-street on Jackson north of this, and we'll continue to work with UC on how we could integrate the intersection into the earliest phase possible to really improve the cycling connection there. Next slide, please. For the segment north along the Gill Tract, we worked with Breesy Transportation Consulting, our city's transportation engineering consultants, and now they're a division of parametrics, to evaluate alternatives that really balance several factors here. There's on-street parking that's heavily utilized by the adjacent school. There's research fields actively used on the other side of the fence, and then there's a lot of overhead utilities there. So the proposal tonight really works to balance those factors, and it includes moving that fence line 5 feet to the east and utilizing a little bit of the field. It converts the angled parking to parallel parking, and maintains most of the existing utilities in the segment between the curb and the bikeway as is. Next slide, please. So there is some vehicle parking impact of this. For the segment adjacent to the graduate student housing, the current off-site construction would include a parking lane in what they would do without this project. There is required emergency vehicle access to each of the courtyards, so the parking lane that they're currently planning to put in actually only provides 7 vehicle spaces. And it's currently no vehicle parking there. It's part of the construction zone, so it's not currently being utilized. So the project would essentially maintain that construction impact into the future. To the north, along the Gill Tract, the changes proposed would reduce vehicle parking by approximately 9 spaces, but continue to provide 22 spaces on the east side of Jackson along that segment. Next slide, please. So the conceptual design south of Monroe really is an on-street facility connecting to the 8th Street and then the 9th Street Bicycle Boulevard in Berkeley. It provides a center line and sharrows through the stretch. Next slide, please. North of Monroe, it would include the 12-foot shared use path adjacent to the graduate student housing and 11-foot travel lanes in either direction. There would be a bicycle access from the on-street shared use to the shared use facility at Riley Drive, utilizing one of the emergency vehicle driveways that will be constructed. And rather than utilize the first courtyard further south, this one comes in near where there's already Riley Drive across the way and a crosswalk, so it has more of an intersection feel to that location for cyclists to make that transition. North of the housing project, it would transition to an 8-foot shared use path. It would continue to take the parking lane until it crosses Village Creek so that we don't touch the culvert, not move the fence line there. But after passing Village Creek and the driveway for Gill Tract access, it would transition east and begin with the vehicle parking lane. And along here, it would, again, move the fence approximately 5 feet, provide 8 feet of cycling track with a 2-foot buffer on either side. Then when it joins with Buchanan in the northbound direction, there would be a ramp to transition to on-street so that you're not having to do that in the middle of the intersection, and then a junction with the east-west Buchanan Bikeway. It would come in a little further to the east here to avoid a lot of signal and utility congestion at the corner, but require at the current layout there relocating a traffic controller. And with that, the recommendation is to approve the conceptual design and direct staff to continue working with UC Berkeley on the final design and implementation of the project.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from council?
Just a quick question. So moving that fence line in on the east, I'm surprised that they're actually allowing that movement, because that was something that was, I had been told, untouchable in that area before. Can you give me a little bit more background on that and why they were allowed to decide?
We do have precedent of that with the construction of the Buchanan Bikeway, so there is some precedent there. The other component, I think, is twofold. One, UC staff sees the benefit of the bikeway and improving connection and serving the large graduate student population that will be there. And the other is that it's currently a pretty rough fence line, and as part of our project, we'll help improve that frontage.
I'd like to also add acknowledgement to Councilmember Jordan for, I can't remember when it was now. It feels like recently, but it was a couple years ago, and we had the site visit with several representatives from UC. The question was raised by Councilmember Jordan about the opportunity, and it was well received, so thank you.
Yeah, I guess I can offer, we had a field meeting that staff arranged with Alameda CTC staff and UC Berkeley staff, and particularly the vice chancellor of blank, I can't remember, but the relevant department. And he came to UC Berkeley from a position at UC Santa Barbara, where he had overseen construction of many bike paths and was pretty enthusiastic. And actually, for somebody at the level he was at, he knew more about bike infrastructure than anybody I'd ever encountered before. So I remember I said something, and he was like, "No, we shouldn't do that. We should do this." And I was like, I was too afraid to ask for that. But so yeah, it was a pretty remarkable meeting, and yeah, that was almost 2 years ago. Yeah.
So that's, you referenced Vice Chancellor Mark Fisher is his name. I had the great pleasure of working with him in 2004 and 2005 at UC Santa Barbara, in which case his priorities for the university were housing and transportation. So it does not surprise me that he was very much into the bicycle infrastructure and initiating the graduate housing at the village.
Questions?
Yeah, I'll ask, even though it's a leading question, because I know the answer, but I think it's good to have in the public record. So the plans show the driveway. The plans show parallel car parking in front of the current driveway to the Guild Tract. I understand from you, maybe that's not the case. So, but for those who might be listening in the universe.
Yeah, there currently is construction for a new shed and work on the driveway, but we'll be working as we go into more detailed design to incorporate where that driveway and reconstruction ends with what we're proposing. But the parking calculation I showed already accounted for area that I think there's one space currently shown in front of the existing driveway that is definitely where the driveway is going to continue.
Okay, great. I'm glad that already accounted for that. So I didn't realize, is there some plan to, well, I guess the apron to the driveway would be rebuilt as a part of this. Is there a plan to move the driveway on the Guild Tract, or is it, we don't know?
I haven't seen the construction plan,
Okay.
so I'm not sure
Could
what state they're leaving, where they're currently utilized.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Justin, have these plans been presented to AUSD?
They were shared with AUSD staff, and Councilmember Jordan reached out to at the board level.
I think I love the plans. I understand it's conceptual, so the one thing that I would ask is just understanding. My oldest son attended Ocean View for 1 year when I lived in the village. We were fortunate enough to be able to walk to Ocean View. But I witnessed chaos then, and I'm sure there's still a little bit of chaos today. And I'm a little bit nervous about continuing to have parking on the east side and parents using that for drop-off. And the expectation that students are going to walk to the south of the campus, cross at the marked crosswalk, and then walk north to the entrance of campus. And so I would hope, as this goes from concept to more finished drawings, there's an opportunity to work with AUSD to see if there's the possibility of having some sort of crossing that's more centered on the actual entrance to the school. I understand that can actually add more complication because you are now legally allowing kids to cross in the middle of chaos, but the reality is I'm sure if we go there any morning, there are kids just running across that street. And so I'd prefer to have a striped crosswalk, but that is really a conversation with AUSD more than, and their operations than something that I would say if AUSD feels comfortable with the plan as is, and they feel that a crosswalk would be more problematic, then I'm not worried. The only other thing I would note is there are places where small areas between the bikeway and the roadway are labeled as landscape. I would ask in further design if that could be looked at it potentially just being a continuation of sidewalk, given that particularly across from the school, the bikeway is 8 feet plus 2 foot buffers, so it might be nice to have actually all of that a paved surface so that as you're getting out of a car or if you're walking on there and you're not walking in the bicycle lanes, you have space to walk and not walk in the bicycle lane. So just small considerations as you move forward, but I love the concept and really excited that we're able to move forward with this.
One question, to go back to basics a little bit, and to go back to the map you had with the sort of circles drawn on it, that the bit of Jackson that sort of curves around until it gets to 8th Street, which looking, as I understand the layout that we've got, we are proposing a ton of changes to, like the other bits that have the protected bikeway. That's part of a future plan to connect that further, or am I getting that wrong?
Sorry, the location you were...
It's the part in front of the community center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so UC is not clear on what they might do with potential reconstruction or redevelopment of community center side. So we don't have direction on whether the on-street parking impacts versus the sort of what's currently landscape area, developable space is more important to them until they figure out programming for that.
But the goal is to figure that out with them at some point in the future.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
I know that they had talked a while back about redeveloping that community center, rebuilding it some way, somehow. So I think those plans are still like in the works of things. So we'll see what happens. And also I just want to just throw out there a little piece of history of when I went to what wasn't Ocean View at the time, but was Albany Middle School. And there's that roundabout part in the front, and that was actually like a roundabout driveway that you drove in to drop your kids off, and then there was some parking for teachers on the side. And then that went away probably a couple years after I graduated. They had put some portables in front there for a while, and then all of a sudden now it's the current condition the way it is. But yeah, it's just, there was intention way back when to drive and drop your child off in a safer manner back in those days. So I don't know whatever happened after that. But
Any further questions from council? Seeing none, we will go to public comment. Is there anyone who would like to comment? Seeing none, we will bring back for council deliberation. Does anyone want to start us off?
I apologize, and I appreciate that you didn't cut me off earlier when I moved beyond questions to discussion and comment.
Usually I'm stricter and you're on thin ice.
I just kept going.
Any other council comments?
Yeah, so the plan includes a proposal for a northbound on-ramp, if you will, from the street onto the path, not too far north of Monroe. I'm not in favor of that. I'm concerned that people could enter the path at pretty high speed and they'd be crossing over oncoming traffic potentially. So I'd prefer not to see that as a safety provision, and eventually the path will connect through to Monroe, so that would be a temporary feature in any case. And I'd like to see that where the path meets the Buchanan path for the pavement edges to be curved to soften those turns. So right now the edge of the shoulder is curved, but on the plans the pavement is a hard angle. So that needs to be a smoother transition for people making that turn on wheeled vehicles. Yeah, I would encourage not using, I don't know what is, well, probably there's nothing planned for the shoulders at this point, but I encourage not using decomposed granite for the shoulders, rather using a crushed rock product. You might think of decomposed granite as crushed rock, but it's not really, it's decomposed, it's falling apart already. You can see from the use of that material on the shoulders of the Albany Greenway path that it's comparing it to other places, much more prone to plants growing in it. The actual grains are very low density because it's feldspar to get technical. It's weathering to clay, and so it washes away. So I'd really like to not see that get used in the city for the most part, or in this project, which isn't in the city. And I know this is off topic, but I'd encourage staff to keep on the list pursuing completing the Village Creek path. So that'd be bringing that path where it ends at the Sprouts parking lot, continuing along Village Creek, so it makes that connection to Jackson, so that people are going back and forth between Southeast Albany via the Dartmouth crossing. We'll have a way to connect over to this path. And finally, I just want to really thank staff for rapid work on this. I know it might not seem that way to some people, but before I came into this position, I would tell people about 7 years median time from concept to reality on the ground, and that's, for good reason, to make sure that government expends resources properly and well. And when I came into office, I started pursuing this, and staff was responsive, and that's only 2.5 years ago, and the first segment looks like it's going to get built in the next 9 or 10 months, so that's pretty lightning speed. So thank you very much for responding to that.
I will add a second to the connecting this as much as possible with other paths. And in thinking about this, add a thought that, not really for this part of the process, but a sort of thing to keep in mind with connecting it to as many other sort of paths as possible, with especially this new building that's going up right next to this. The most common trip people are going to be taking on bikes from this area is to campus. And the probably best route for that would be to take this new path to Buchanan and then go up Marin to the Albany Greenway. That may not be the most expedient path that everyone will take. So if we can connect it to other paths, complete it going all the way to 8th, getting it as many of the different directions that people could go to when they're going on a bike and saying, I need to go to campus, how am I going to do that? I think that would behoove us, as well as much as we can or the university can, encouraging them to use this path to then go to Buchanan and then use the protected bikeways.
Oh, and I was just going to mention one of the things, like John was saying, about less plants, more pavement, because also I would assume that would take less resources as far as maintaining those plants and stuff if it was just pavement. And then that way we wouldn't have to worry about upkeep and maintenance of that as well, so.
I would agree with that on the section that has car parking adjacent, but on the section where the path is immediately adjacent to curb or to road traffic, I think having that landscape buffer is useful, both for general safety of younger people who might be using it, such as going to the school, and also just sort of psychological comfort. So that's the section along the building, so I would like to see landscaping between the path and the curb there. I don't really want anybody to have to walk right on the curb line or roll right on the curb line.
Yeah, I think my original comments were primarily focused where the on-street parking was, because the reality was the path narrowed down to 8, and you got 2-foot buffers on the sides, whereas kind of south of Gooding, it's 12 feet path plus edge, so I think there is the possibility for landscaping there. Hopefully trees when we say landscaping, but I get it, we're conceptual right now. When we get further on the plans, it'd be great to see. But I do think, for me, the biggest thing will be that coordination with AUSD with the reconfiguration of the parking, with the path, with the new sidewalks. What is the optimal circulation for students as they're trying to get across? So, because in the past, it was always, oh, we can't really get a sidewalk over there. And there were a lot of reasons why we didn't do anything, but now we finally will have a sidewalk on that side and a path. So I think it would be good to talk with the AUSD about that.
Your mention of the path from Village Creek to Monroe being 12 feet wide sparked a thought, which is, I think the landscape width as proposed is 2 feet wide. Is that right? Or is it a 2-foot shoulder and then a?
At Jackson, so in that same section, it's a 5-foot landscape area, 12-foot path, 2-foot buffer.
2-foot buffer between the landscape and the path, or between the path and the
buffer
building?
Between the path and whatever happens on.
Okay. So it's 5-foot landscape. I was going to say, if it makes a difference, which I think if it's 5 feet, it won't make the difference, but I definitely would like trees to be planted along there, and I know trees, as they get close to curbs, particularly since it's an AC transit route, can get sensitive. I don't know if AC Transit or the university has design guidelines on where trees can go relative to curbs and how wide the landscape strip has to be. But if it made the difference between having trees and not, making that path 11 feet wide instead of 12 feet wide, I would want that flexibility. I want to be able to prioritize getting trees in there that aren't just going to get, severely damaged by the buses going past, interfere with the buses.
You bringing up the buses makes me wonder, has AC Transit been looped in with all of this, and are they full on full concept?
AC Transit has reviewed the concept, yeah.
Any further thoughts? If not, I think we need a motion to approve.
I approve the conceptual design as presented with a consideration of the adjustments that have been discussed.
Second?
Yes, I'll second. I thought you were saying you were seconding. I will second.
This has been moved and seconded. City Clerk, can we please have the roll?
Mayor Tiedemann?
Yes.
Councilmember Hanson Romero?
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mackey?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much for all your work on this. And with that, we move to item number 12, which is our subcommittee reports and reports on appointed representation in Albany. So who's going to start? That's Councilmember Jordan.
Okay. So I attended the Policy Programs and Legislative Committee of the Alameda County Transportation Commission and the commission meeting, and I don't think there's anything really substantial to report from either, with perhaps the exception that would be of some interest that the legislature has passed a bill allowing certain cities, not this city, but certain cities, to pilot red light enforcement cameras. So that will be, well, hopefully the governor signs, and then that can go forward, and if that's successful, then more cities can use it.
kind of already gave my update early on, but yeah, it was a great presentation as far as the collected food waste, and they're going to be implementing the program even further as it goes. Right now, it's mostly food collection through more of the larger restaurants, as well as, grocery stores and other things, and then working with different distribution channels throughout to then process that food, and also working with the health department as well. And I think that they are going to be connecting with the school districts as well to try to get some of that food collection that could be going to waste as well moving forward. But it was quite an amazing presentation. The slide decks are on the website, so if anybody's interested, check out that further. And then they also have these great little cards that they've created, which talks about how to keep certain foods longer and use them in many different ways. And so it's really great programming that they're doing there. I'm always very impressed by the stopwaste.org group. So
I attended the League of California Cities annual conference. It was a great experience. It was nice to be up in Sacramento. Councilmember Lopez attended as well. And then that was a Wednesday through Friday event. And then on Thursday night, I was sworn into the East Bay Division Board as an at-large member for Alameda County. And then none of my other bodies met. No, there's one update. So technically this is Aaron's, but Alameda County Mayor's Conference next March, we will be hosting. And so we're still wanting to make sure the date is fixed, but I'm hoping many of you can attend.
Yes, on that, the city manager and I have already started discussing so that we don't hand you responsibility for this in the first month or two of doing it. So we are already figuring out what would be in our goodie bags and where we could host, and we'll loop
It will
you
be
in.
hosted in John's backyard.
Say, Emeryville gave us a high bar. So yes, we will figure that out. I attended a couple meetings. We had EBCE's board met on the 20th. We had some really big stuff there, including the power content label for 2022 was passed, and we have kept increasing our renewable. The power content label, they describe it as basically the nutrition label for energy, of showing how much greenhouse gas we are producing and what our renewable factor is and where it's all coming from. EBC has a couple different products, and we are one of the cities that have defaulted new accounts to Renewable 100, which is the most renewable one. But overall, we've accomplished something pretty great, and Councilmember Jordan, you would have been proud. I did the math before I went there, and no one else did, and so I got to show off. In 2021, the average GHG tons per megawatt hour for EBC were about 497 for if you average out all of our products. For 2022, it was about 385. So a really big reduction, which a large bit comes from the vast majority of new megawatt hours EBC is producing are in Renewable 100. So us switching our default product is a really good move and has really done some good. So that's great. We also voted to keep going, approve bringing in the city of Lathrop as a new community for EBCE. So we're going on with that. So we'll bring on them in Stockton probably by 2025. And then there's a lot of big news from this one. Our rebranding of EBC is going forward, and the sort of hard launch of that will happen soon. So it will be AVO Community Energy soon.
It'll be what?
EVA Community Energy,
I didn't-
Alameda plus Valley.
Oh, okay, nice, nice, excellent.
If you want to tune into this or one of the previous meetings, there was lots of discussion about it. So there's lots of discussion about the branding. I also wanted to highlight there was a Supervisor Miley hosted a meeting on the 21st in Castro Valley about the BAFA regional bond and the county's expenditure plan, where they reviewed some of the reasons why we need it and the equity plans that the county is going through. I'm pleased to report that from ABAG Executive Board, Alameda County is moving a lot faster on this than anyone else, and there will be more events like that in the future. You can find it. I think there will be several more of those events in Castro Valley over essentially quarterly, and there will be one in our district. There will be some town halls and stuff in the next couple months. I don't remember off the top of my head, so I will update everyone when those come around. But things to look forward to for people who are interested.
I've been approached about endorsing the measure, and I said I can't endorse something until I have a spend plan to look at. So glad to hear Alameda County is headed rapidly to that. The person said that for a region-wide agency, they weren't anticipating having their spend plan until next summer, which I was like, wow, that's cutting it pretty close.
Without going too deep into it, I'll say that so the counties can't actually pass their expenditure plan until after the bond passes, but they can get to work on it sooner. And the BAFA plan, I think they also have some limits of when they can do it, but they can have it much sooner than the counties. And they, as I've reported on a couple of the ABAG meetings, that work is ongoing and going strong.
Might that agency have to pass it after the measure as well?
No, it'll be done before the measure.
Okay, I was gonna say that sort of violates the, what are we spending, being asked to spend money on?
That one will be done before.
Okay, all right, thanks. And more than 5,000 tons, that's be wild.
With that, there's also attached to our agenda is a report on the Housing Authority for Alameda County from our representative there. It's not fully loading for me, but I counsel anyone who's interested to take a look at it. They had some scholarships and some other stuff, I think. Is there any questions on this or public comment? Not seeing any.
Just wanted to thank you for doing the math, because that's been a burning question for me, what the portfolio-wide emission factor is. There's a little bit of smoke and mirrors with the Renewable 100, so I was more interested in the portfolio-wide. And so to hear that that's improving dramatically is very positive.
Yes, and as the staff pointed out there, it is interesting of the goal for that is to increase the renewable portfolio, not necessarily to decrease GHG emissions. So the fact that we are decreasing those GHG emissions pretty quickly is great. And this all is with the background of the goal is to be have putting no carbon into the system by 2030, for it to be 100% renewable.
That's soon.
It is. With that, we will go to future agenda items. Are there any members of council with a future agenda item to note? Not seeing any. Are there any members of the public? Not seeing any there. With that, we'll go to announcements of city meetings and events. As mentioned earlier, we have a town hall, which is a special city council meeting later this week on Thursday at the community center. Encourage anyone who's interested to join us. And with that, we come to adjournment. Thank you to the other council members, the vice mayor, city clerk, city manager, city attorney, all of our. Yes. Oh, I was getting that. All of the people who stuck with us and all of the staff who are with us, we are, as I said earlier, closing with a moment of silence in commemoration of those who lost their lives in the shooting early last month. May their memory be a blessing, and with that, we are adjourned.